Okay, good morning, everybody. They say that April showers bring May flowers. Well, they used to. As I sit here today on my farm on Bodmin Moor, we've had another very dry and really quite chilly April. And whilst the lack of rain can help me at lambing time, nobody volunteers to go out at 6 a.m. when it's tipping down. It doesn't serve the farm well. And even with our very extensive and organic stocking rates, we are now running surprisingly short of spring grass. A fairly moderate but a distinct example, I feel, of our changing and unpredictable climate. Welcome to our webinar today, How to Build Affordable Homes and Combat the Climate Emergency. My name is Dominic Fairman, and as well as being a Bodmin Moor commoner, I sit on the board of Cornwall Community Land Trusts, and I also currently represent 6 very rural parishes in North Cornwall on Cornwall Council. If, like me, you are a keen follower of climate change news and policy, you have probably worked out for yourself by now that the opportunity to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees has already flown. And the best case we can now hope for is to achieve as much headroom under 2 degrees as possible. Indeed, in some parts of the world, they are already living with 1.5 degrees, namely the Middle East and Central Asia. And as a direct result, this has reportedly already displaced around 7 million people. For me, one of the worst climate change legacies we are handing down to our children is to leave them the moral dilemmas of how to deal with increasing overseas conflicts over increasingly scarce resources, resulting in increasingly desperate refugees. And if anyone thinks that the current awful situation in Ukraine is not in any way climate related, then I'd ask you, would Putin been so emboldened if there had not been such a reliance on Russian gas in Europe as a transition fuel away from coal? This is why the subject of our webinar today is so important. In my 6 years in local government, I've learnt a few lessons. The first is that everything is a balance. And for us here today, it is striking the right balance between future-proofing our new homes whilst maintaining genuine affordability. The second lesson in politics, it is wise to be neither too far in front of nor too far behind public opinion. And with regard to climate change and the housing crisis, I sense we are currently slipping behind where the public are actually now. Finally, you need to make good decisions based on evidence and then stick to them. And we have all the evidence we now need on around how to build with the climate change mitigation and adaptation in place. And we should be continually lobbying at every opportunity for this to become the norm, and then continually pushing the boundaries with each and every new development. We have 3 very interesting and distinct sessions for you today. Firstly, a view from both senior politicians and officers at Cornwall Council with responsibility for both housing and climate change policy, followed by Helen Bone of Homes England to give us the national context. Then, after a short break, we have an array of industry professionals to talk you through the modern methods of construction, and then finally some real-life case studies from as far away as the beautiful Isles of Mull and Iona. My own personal preference for online meetings is that for as many people as who feel comfortable to keep their camera on, but for everybody to turn their microphones off. In my opinion, this makes for a more human interaction when those of us who are talking can at least see some of their audience. We have a lot of people on the call today, but only 24 of you are visible on my screen at any one time. So if you want to ask a question, and I hope that many of you will, then the best route is to put it into the chat bar at any time during the sessions, and hopefully one of the team will pick it up, or perhaps to raise a virtual hand during the Q&As we have at the end of each session. So without more ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome 2 of my fellow Cornwall councillors from our current cabinet. Councillor Ollie Monk, who has responsibility for housing and planning, and Councillor Martin Alvey, who has responsibility for the environment and climate change. Knowing what very busy people they are, I will take a short question and answer session for them straight after their presentation. So if you have any questions for your elected representatives, this will be your best opportunity.
Okay, if I may introduce myself, so I'm Ollie Monk, as I've been already introduced as Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning. Thank you very much, Dominic, for your preamble and for introducing me. I'd just like to say as little as possible, so I'm sure you've got the questions bit is the most important bit, where I can give you some direct answers to the challenges that we face. I'd just like to say thanks for the work that the Cornwall Community Land Trust is doing. It's vital work in not only producing some of the much needed affordable accommodation that we desperately need, but also in winning the hearts and minds of people in the planning process, and laying the foundations really to build that trust within the public, and get them to understand that we need to build some affordable housing. Last year, across Cornwall, including some of the houses that you've built, we've built 703 what's classed as that term affordable housing, which was the second highest in England. I think there was one London borough that produced more what were classed as affordable housing, and I guess they were building a couple of tower blocks or something. So we've actually done really, really well at building affordable housing. However, the sheer weight and volume of demand sort of outstrips that achievement very, very easily. We've got ambitious plans for the future. We want to speed up delivery and deliver more overall, so we can work out just to come out consistently top of any sort of league table in the future of delivering more homes for local people. And each of our communities can play a part in achieving this. And by no small means, the work that you guys do is again, I must reiterate, is of extreme importance. And what I want to do is find anything that stops you producing and building more affordable homes, and I want to know what it is, and I want to know how we can help you and how we can speed up delivery. So if you've got a bottleneck anywhere, and there's anything that you need and you think the council can help, then we're there for you. We want you to carry on producing and building the homes for that local Cornish need that's out there and is growing. So, you know, I think you guys and Andrew have done a fantastic job so far, and I'm sure you'll continue to do that as well. And again, we want to help, and I want to know what it is we can do to help you more. So without further ado, I'll pass you straight over to Martin. Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie. And so my part in this first segment of the morning is to bring Ollie's overall discussion around housing into context with climate change. As Dominic said in the introduction, I'm the portfolio holder for environment and climate change at Cornwall Council. And my portfolio and Ollie's have a significant overlap, clearly, in terms of delivery of housing. I'm sure many of you will know that back in January 2019, Cornwall Council declared a climate emergency with the target of reaching net zero by 2030. I'm proud to say that I actually was the seconder of that motion way back then. And so have been particularly privileged to have been given climate change as one of the contents of my portfolio. And just to reassure you that I'm...
Sorry, John, I meant to be in a meeting at 10 o'clock.
I'm equally determined to deliver on that 2030 target as my predecessor with this part of the portfolio, Edwina Hannaford, was. So a key element of that 2019 declaration was within 6 months to create a plan in order to achieve that target. And a key element of that plan was to create what's known as a climate change DPD development planning document. So this is a document that will become enforceable as a policy in planning decisions moving forward once it's been adopted. Now, because it's a planning document, because it carries weight, the process to produce that is not an overnight one. And so it has to go through various drafting and consultation processes, for which we are now pretty much at the conclusion. It is currently with the Planning Inspectorate for what's called examination. And at that stage, essentially, the planning inspector is ensuring that the DPD doesn't contradict national planning policy, but it does reinforce it or fill in gaps where appropriate. So that document will hopefully, towards the end of the year, will get to a point where it actually becomes an adopted document, but it is already at a point where it carries significant weight in planning decisions and can actually be quoted in planning decisions. The creation of that document has been a challenge because we've got two competing forces at play here. Our strong desire to ensure that development is both environmentally and ecologically sustainable, and I'll highlight that Cornwall Council also declared an ecological emergency in November last year. But at the same time, what we also need to do is to ensure that we don't, or as far as possible, we don't create an environment which will prevent the delivery of housing, particularly affordable housing. So the costs that get put on developers through the development planning document have to be balanced against ensuring that we don't disincentivize development. And that's where organisations like the Land Trust are key in recognising that very fine balancing act. A few other things I would highlight. So the principle of the development planning document, which actually sits with Ollie's team, but my carbon neutral team have been very instrumental in its creation and development, is that fabric first approach. So the recognition that if you build the houses right now, you're not going to find yourselves in a retrofitting situation in years to come, because the one thing that is really challenging at the moment across Cornwall and our aging housing stock is actually retrofitting to make homes more environmentally friendly. The other key to bringing forward affordable housing that is environmentally friendly is that it must also be cheap to run. So what we can't do is throw out things that are going to make housing more expensive to run at the cost of the environment if we can possibly avoid it. Again, so that comes back to that fabric first approach. So the houses that are built to actually operate most effectively with renewable energy sources such as heat pumps. The other important element is our ecology, and so again within our development planning document, Cornwall has been one of the first areas in the country to press the 10% biodiversity net gain in development. I've spoken enough now, and I know that you've got a tight schedule today, so I will stop now and leave the floor open for Dominic to chair any questions to either myself or Ollie.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Martin. That's been brilliant. So there are a couple of questions coming to the chat bar. Perhaps Stephen Reynolds, do you want to vocalise your question, or I'm happy to read it out?
Yeah, it's simply to ask whether I understand there will be some examination in public of the climate emergency DPD. Have you any idea on the timing of that, either of the Cornwall Council people here?
Hi, I'm Emily Rubin from the planning policy team. It's going to be in June, the week commencing the 20th of June.
Okay. And are those open to any members of the public to attend?
Yes, and we'll be advertising the details shortly on our climate emergency DPD website, so keep an eye on that.
Perfect, thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Emily. It's not often we get a direct answer to a direct question, so that's brilliant. So Sue Cooper has put in quite a long question. Sue, I don't know if you can vocalise it yourself, but I guess it's around, the answer will be around the next local plan and how we're going to manage affordable sites within that. Are they always going to be exception sites, or are they going to be more at the heart of people's communities, I think is the basic of the question. Sue, unless you want to elaborate.
Yeah, basically, because I mean, I think it's often fundamental to where they come up that they're going to be more expensive for people because they're kind of on the outskirts. They need to be central, and as Martin said, they need to be built to be affordable to run, not cheap. I mean, they're not cheap anyway. You know, what is an affordable house when you're thinking in terms of buying? But yeah, I think you captured what I meant. Thank you.
I mean, just very briefly, Sue, the issue that you often find in a more central location is it's a brownfield site which costs more to actually prepare to start building on in the first place, and then the viability study comes into it and all that. So it's whereas if you've got a little piece of land and infill almost on the outskirts of town, it's often easier to get the viability levels right to actually make stuff that people can afford. However, I totally agree with you, and I know with the tier 3 devolution stuff that's being talked about, there's going to be a brown site grant fund available to try and make unlock some of these sites and make them actually viable to actually develop. But densification of an existing urban centre, I think, is part of the way to go, and it's something that we need to do. It's because obviously I'm sure the challenges that we all face, it's all well good all sat here thinking, yeah, we need more houses that local people can afford to rent or buy, and then get those key workers to be able to get them on the housing ladder. The problem is, as soon as you start going towards the outskirts, is everyone kicks off about it, and it's extremely difficult to get planning permission in the first place. So I think densification has a very, very important role to play in this. However, it's just getting that viability issue sorted out.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I'll just finally, for this question and answer session, I'll pick up a question from Rachel, who's from Hale, I believe, and a new community land trust, asking around, are there any, are the council going to provide any low-cost loans to help people get smaller sites off the ground? Rachel, do you want to elaborate on that, or are you happy?
It was not so much a cap in hand question.
Yeah.
It's more about, we're a new land trust, but I'm an architect with 20 years experience and done quite a lot with Cornwall Council. I understand how hard it is to get development projects to happen. But as a new land trust, what we're finding is two things: access to land or buildings. Cornwall Council are the best placed, in fact, to make tiny sites available to land trust by far. And the other is it's actually quite expensive for us to take on loans, even when you're working with an ecological, with a socially responsible investor. It still works out something like 10 to 12% across the construction cycle. That can only be passed on in the cost of the home. So I just wanted to make the point that land and finance are two important considerations, especially when you're looking at low carbon, because by my estimates, the real good stuff that's going to benefit the end user can add to up to about 20k to a build cost. And it's really, really important that we work out how to tackle that, because we're all in the business of making low cost homes for the end, not the construction cost so much, but the in-use cost. That's where we want to get to. That's why we're all here.
Thank you, Rachel. Some good points, and hopefully we're going to answer some of those points during the course of the day. That's the whole point of the webinar. So I'm going to thank our Cornwall councillors at this point. Feel free to stay as long as you like, but we need to keep the webinar roughly on schedule. And I'm going to move on to the next item on our program.
Thank you, Dominic. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ollie, and thank you, Martin. And which will be Andrew, as CEO of the Cornwall Community Land Trust. And I do believe you do have a presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and a big thank you to Martin and Ollie for coming along. Cornwall Community Land Trust works very closely with Cornwall Council as a partner, and it's great that the great work of the predecessor council is being carried forward in the work of Martin and Ollie. So we're enormously grateful to them for their efforts and for coming along today and supporting this this event as well. So, well, look, how to build affordable homes and combat climate emergency. No one can accuse us of lacking ambition. I'm sure that many wags might ask why we don't go just a little stage further and claim that we're going to end world hunger and stop all wars as well. But yes, it is an ambition to build affordable homes and also address as far as we possibly can within the limited budgets available to achieve affordable housing, improvements in terms of climate outcome. We go on to the next slide. The background to this is, of course, the context at the moment is the current housing emergency in Cornwall itself. And I mean, these kind of statistics, the 42% fall in the availability of rented homes, the 1 in 4 private renters who currently fear eviction, the 18+% increase in rents, and the 26% plus increase in construction costs, which have made many projects unviable at present, and we can't proceed with them. Then also the increase in notices to quit, which I know that many of us will have experience of that, or speaking to people who have, in the background, of course, of a very significant, almost industrial scale increase in demand for second-hand holiday homes. We go on to the next slide. I mean, the bright thing is that communities can do it for themselves, and there is a role for the community-led home sector. We're not going to be building at scale with the big boys and girls, but we can make a very big difference by lots of communities doing their own thing in their own locality. I mean, this is the latest in a series of seminars, webinars, a large number of them for communities seeking to address the housing need with permanent solutions. In the past, we've looked at finance and site finding, and today we're looking at climate change, and it's not just a hippie dream that communities can do it. You know, I think Cornwall Community Land Trust and the many local community land trusts around Cornwall and on the Isles of Scilly, and the work that communities have done in actually stimulating activities, have proven to deliver. And I think that our work and the work of others is testament to that. We go on to the next slide. So Cornwall Community Land Trust has helped to deliver 270 homes since 2007, when it was established, and is growing. Current projects include a recent celebration. Some of you may have seen in the media a week or so ago, down on the Lizard Ruin Minor, where there were 6 additional homes there. There's a picture of some of the people outside the home, some inside, enjoying that event. One that we were pleased that local resident Jenny Agutter came along and pulled the curtain on the event itself. And then I mean, beyond that, we obviously 6 is helpful, but we need to go further. As I say, we're not going to be building, probably not going to be building at the kind of scale that some of the others are, but we can make a big difference. And we have over 100 homes, either with planning permission or awaiting planning across Cornwall, and we're working with local CLTs and community-led housing groups across Cornwall as well. And there are some of the names of the places that we're working with and alongside. We go on to the next slide, please. That excluding Jenny there, that group of scruffs there are some of our team, and a small team of people within our community land trust, outside some of the homes at Ruin Minor recently. So we are, for those that don't know, we're a charity, a community benefit society. We're an umbrella CLT and a community-led homes hub. We're led by a board of volunteers. Dominic is a vice chair of that, with a range of skills, and we include a tenant representative in those members. We have a small staff team and of housing and development professionals. We work alongside Cornwall Rural Community Charity, where we share an office, or our tenants in their office in Penzance, and we recently moved from Truro, that is. Some of you may remember, and we work alongside other housing, that is like other housing associations like Cornwall Rural Housing Association, Coastline, Astor, Cornwall Housing, and ethical lending partners. Some of you've met these at previous events. It is like the Charities Aid Foundation and others. And we're also a registered provider, so we are kind of equivalent to a housing association when we need to be, and an investment partner with Homes England. If you go on to the next slide. Then in relation to combating climate change, our board regularly reviews our construction standards and maintains aspirations to try and press us to go further in terms of the outcomes, and advises communities and manages those expectations through those construction standards. And this includes setting energy performance certificate targets, electric vehicle charging points, wildlife mitigation and enhancements, and other targets within the developments we're engaged in. For example, at Ruin Minor, we achieved through quality of the build there, and as Martin was saying earlier, fabric first approach, very close to an EPC A on those homes, and they, like all of our projects, are either have air source or ground source heating or solar heating. We've not yet used MMC, modern methods of construction. We'll be hearing more about that a little bit later on, but certainly keeping an open mind on that. And we're working with local companies to achieve high air tightness and in the quality of build. And we're also a member of the Southwest Procurement Alliance, who will be speaking today. On to the next slide. There's the professional support available. We'll help community groups. Obviously, Policy 9, which I think has been mentioned already in some of the discussion, is obviously one of the primary tools that we use in order to be able to manage the costs of development on rural exception sites, as they're known. And we can help communities with the call for an identification of land, the gathering together for finance, and also making sure that at the end of the day, that pragmatism ensures that we can kind of deliver projects rather than just dream about them. Going to the next slide. So communities we can help communities by one of a number of options, either setting up a CLT, or by setting up a housing working party where CCLT takes the risk on behalf of the community, or working with self-help projects like co-housing and housing co-op groups. Go on to the next slide. And so today's webinar is obviously, you've heard about the support from Cornwall Council. We'll be hearing more about it from officers in a moment. As Dominic said, we've got some excellent speakers coming to you from other walks of life and experience as well. So that's onto the last slide, which is to say thank you to you all, and moving on. So thank you very much, Dominic, to allow me to.
Thanks for that, Andrew. And obviously, I don't have to ask if you're sticking around for the Q&As. You'll be here. So next on the list, I'm really pleased to have a representative from Homes England, Helen Bone. The title of her thing is The National Context and Delivery of Housing. Homes England are an arm of government who are there to drive, good housing everywhere. And in particular, they are particularly interested in affordable housing, which Helen's takes the lead on. So, Helen, are you with us?
Dominic, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
It's always a relief, isn't it?
Yes.
Good to see.
Yeah.
Good to see you again, Dominic, and thank you very much for inviting Homes England to take part in this webinar. I'm in another webinar this morning also, so I'm dialing in and then I have to dial out again. So I'm just here for this very particular session. And as Dominic has said, I'm going to say a little bit more about Homes England, but we are a government agency, and I'm going to be specifically talking about how we are using our investment to drive energy efficiency and increase productivity of housing. So can we have the next slide? And thank you very much for Perrin for doing the slides. Okay, so Homes England was set up in 2018 to play a major role in fixing the housing market. And I'm not going to talk to every word of this slide, but there's a few detailed slides and I'm going to make them available so that they can be circulated. And I've got another set of slides specifically on modern methods of construction that Patty's asked me to make available, and I'm very happy to do so. But just in terms of context, it's worth remembering we have quite a broad agenda. So we actually are acquire land and bring it forward for development. And we have a range of investment products, including debt funding. So we do lend into the housing sector. We make money available for infrastructure funding, equity funding, but I'm specifically going to be talking to you today about grant funding. We also use our network's influence and expertise to work with all of you, and Ollie's comment earlier about what else can we do to help speed delivery is absolutely what we're here to do. So it's brilliant to have an opportunity to talk to all of you today and to offer that out to you. We here at Homes England are here to walk alongside you, to support you in your ambitions to deliver really high quality affordable housing. And so there's a couple of things I'm not going to talk about today, but I'm going to make some links available into the chat because I think they're really worth knowing about. I mean, Emily will probably flag up one of them in the next session, which is around the government's work around the Future Home Standard. And also I've got a link to the information about what the government's doing around the existing decarbonisation of social housing, and that was something Martin mentioned about retrofit and what we do with our existing housing. So all of that are elements of work that government are involved in, but I'm not going to talk about today, but I will put in the chat so that you can follow that up. So can I ask for the next slide, please? So I'm going to talk specifically to you about how we're using the Affordable Homes Programme to drive energy efficient and increase productivity of affordable housing. And we were delighted to launch in 2021 a new 5-year programme that the government has allocated £7.4 billion to deliver up to 130,000 affordable homes. In terms of context, these are homes over and above the homes that are delivered through what people might know as through Section 106, i.e. those that are delivered through the planning process. So these are additional affordable homes. So particularly things like 100% affordable housing scheme. So when Andrew talked about, for example, rural exception sites, they tend to be 100% affordable and they require grant funding, and that's the process, that's the purpose of our funding. So a bit more detail there for you to read and take away, but I'm not going to talk to today. If we can move on to the next slide. So one of the comments I heard from one of the participants about, what is affordable housing, and it does mean different things to different people, but for us through the Affordable Homes Programme there are some very clear definitions of what we can fund as an affordable home, and that is homes for rent which are either at social rent or affordable rent. So social rent has quite a complex calculation, but affordable rent is up to 80% of market rent. So we can provide more details on those definitions if you need them. But also a key government objective is helping more people into home ownership. Therefore, we also fund routes into home ownership, and that is predominantly through our shared ownership model. Although also now we do grant fund home ownership for people with long-term disabilities, older people's shared ownership, and a product called Rent to Buy, where you can rent for up to 5 years before buying your product. Now, there'll be other tenures that people will be hearing about, for example, first homes. That is another route into home ownership. It's not one that we fund through the Affordable Homes Programme, so I'm not going to talk to that today, but again, can provide more detail should you need it. And probably really important to say here, given the rural context for many of you, is that we have for the first time in the Affordable Homes Programme a target for rural housing. And I think that's really, really good news for all of us, because it keeps our feet to the fire to say, are we doing the most we can to be delivering rural housing where we know there is such significant need and such pressure on affordability. Next slide, please, Perrin. So just a little bit about how organisations can apply for funding. We have two main routes. So one of them is through strategic partnerships, which we organise multi-year deals with some of our larger housing associations. So Andrew mentioned, for example, Astor, and Live West would be another one who are active in your patch. They are strategic partners, which means they have applied for multi-year funding. They have that funding now. They have some rural targets, which is worth talking to them about. And I would encourage you, as you develop your projects and schemes, to be talking to our strategic partners. They bring a lot of capacity and capability affordability. However, we recognise that there is a massive opportunity to really support our smaller and specialist providers. So Cornwall Community Land Trust are one of those as a registered provider and investment partner at Homes England, and we have many more. So we have a more flexible way for organisations to bid in on a scheme by scheme basis for funding to us, and Cornwall CLT have done that in the past, and we very much hope will do so in the future. Just one caveat is that if you are applying for a rented tenure grant, then you do have to be a registered provider. We do need you to be regulated by the regulator of social housing in order to access our grant. Next slide, please. So I hope you'll be heartened to hear that we have some really important strategic priorities to deliver through the Affordable Homes Programme as set out by government. One of those is a significant focus and investment in modern methods of construction, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Encouraging the update of the new published National Design Guide and Building for a Healthy Life. So all of our schemes are assessed against those as they come in for funding. And of most importance, maximising the energy efficiency and sustainability of new affordable housing supply. So I am actually really delighted to see the amazing quality of propositions that we're getting through from our housing associations now in terms of energy efficient. We are funding passive housing, we are funding some really high quality fabric first approaches, and we are seeing a massive uptick in delivery using ground source heat pumps and other methodologies. And I think it really plays to Martin's point he made earlier, really, which is for our housing association partners, they have a long-term stewardship role, and they don't want to be going back and retrofitting these properties later. They want to get it right first time. So I actually think that the affordable housing sector is really driving this agenda, which is really exciting. And I also think that we can, through our investment, drive that quality up further. Now, I recognise from some of the conversations that we've had today that people's concern about, well, that costs more. So we do recognise it costs more, and I had a good conversation with the Cornwall CLT trustees just the other week, where we talked about the fact that, and I hope it's heartening to hear that Homes England do understand that, you know, if we're delivering in a rural area, if we're delivering very small numbers of houses, sometimes, I mean, Ruin Minor was 6 beautiful and brilliant houses, much needed. And if we are looking to drive really high energy efficient homes, that this is going to cost more. But actually, if we don't do it now, we'll just have to do it later. And so we do have the flexibility within the Affordable Homes Programme in terms of how much grant could be made available for those schemes that really are pushing those funding priorities for us. So we recognise that there are additional costs associated with those, and we will support those where we are. Where we often work very well in partnership with Cornwall Council is where we might partner fund. So where a scheme may be very expensive, we might be able to offer a certain level of grant, and then Cornwall Council often come up using commuted sums or other funds to top that up. So we can support fund supported and specialist housing. We're particularly keen to work with SME providers, and again, Ruin Minor was a great example of a local contractor and who had such amazing pride in what they delivered, really. So why would we not want to do more of that? And we're trying to use our investment to increase how many SME contractors there are. So next slide. How am I doing on time, Dominic?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Are you nearly the end of your
yeah, I just got 3 slides on MMC. Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just thought it would be interesting just to flag, because I've seen later on in the agenda and I can't stay, so I apologise for that, that you will be talking about modern methods of construction. So I just thought I'd talk a little bit about what Homes England's doing in that, and then what we might want to do is follow this up. There might be a future session. So I'm not the technical expertise on this, so I'm going to talk to these slides, but I think, you know, perhaps there's a future session we can do. So if I could ask for the next slide, Perrin. So again, I hope you'll be heartened to hear that one of the key strategic objectives that government has given us is improving construction productivity. We're just coming to the end of this strategic plan, so we have done a lot of work around this, and we are developing our new strategic plan, and MMC is going to feature very, very strongly in that. Next slide, please. So I just thought I would just highlight one of the ways that we are looking to learn and accelerate the delivery of schemes through modern methods of construction. I recognise some of these are large sites and aren't necessarily going to talk to the audience here. So before I talk about them, I just wanted to give one example of a scheme that we've recently approved an allocation for, which is a community land trust in Wiltshire called Seamed Cleave, CLT. So this is 10 beautiful passive house on a rural exception site, a mix of affordable rent and shared ownership homes. And this is a small rural provider, Whitehorse Housing Association, and they have around 350 homes. So I want to use that as an example really, because we're working with very, very small providers who are doing MMC. We are targeting our strategic partners. So the likes of Live West and Astor have targets to deliver around 25% of all of their delivery using modern methods of construction, because this is how we're going to do the learning, and we're going to create the economies of scale to shift the way that we are building houses. And just as an example here on this slide, we are using our own land holdings, and we are disposing of these sites to developers who are committing to deliver these sites using modern methods of construction. And then this is all part of an evaluation project, which will then evaluate and feed back and come back out through the sector. And again, in conversation with members of Cornwall CLT, we did talk about whether we could invite to a future session, for example, some of our housing associations, our larger housing associations who have done a lot of R&D in this space, and I think could really share some interesting stuff. I know you've got stuff later on today, and that may well cover it. So next slide, and I think I'm nearly done. To talk about how we are using our investment also to invest in housing factories. So I'll leave you to read that, but we are investing in Ilka Homes. And the final slide, we are also investing in, I'm going to try and say this right, Sekisui House, which is a joint venture between Urban Splash, Sekisui and Homes England. So what I hope this just illustrates is that we're trying to, through government and government funding, really pump prime and accelerate the delivery of homes through modern methods of construction. And I think that's it, Perrin, is it? No more slides.
No, thank you for that. That's been absolutely brilliant. I'm heartened, actually. It's good to know that there's an arm of government doing so much good work. I believe that, yeah, there probably is something in the future we can look at. Modular housing hasn't really come to Cornwall yet, and obviously it's something that needs to be done at scale first, but I think on the back of all the lessons learned on bigger sites, there's something we could all look into at that on that score. So thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate you coming out of your other webinar just to talk to us in Cornwall. That's brilliant. And I'll let you go at that point. Yeah, just
thanks, Dominic. Thank you, everybody, for having me, and enjoy the rest of the webinar. Bye.
No, that's great. Thank you, Helen.
Bye.
So next we have two senior officers from Cornwall Council. Now we've got Sarah Roberts first, who's the Principal Rural Housing Enabler on the Affordable Housing team, and then Emily, Ruben, who's already chipped in, who is in on the Planning Policy team. So I take it you're doing one after another. Sarah, are you ready to, you're going to present or just talk?
Sorry, I forgot I was on mute there.
That's okay.
No problem. Yeah, so yeah, I've not got any main slides to go through, but I've got a couple of slides just to provide with you later in my sort of just brief overview of what the team are doing at the moment. So I'm Sarah Roberts, and I work for Cornwall Council in the Affordable Housing team as their Rural Housing Enabler. So I work as part of a team, there's 11 of us in the team, and we support communities across all of Cornwall to bring forward more affordable homes for local people. As part of the measures to address the housing crisis over the last couple of months, I've been working with colleagues in our planning department on a new initiative for the affordable housing team around proactive enabling and community engagement. And this is so that we can support communities to try and bring forward more sites for affordable homes across Cornwall. Given that there's over 200 sort of parishes in Cornwall, and only 11 of us in the team, we've had to devise a way of prioritising and sort of focusing our work. And we thought it'd be helpful just to give a bit of an update on what the team are kind of focusing on at the moment. And so we've done this by sort of pulling together some background data for each of the parishes in Cornwall around aspects such as the number of people that are in housing need in each parish, whether or not that what the affordable housing delivery rates have been per each parish, whether or not there's been any delivery over the last couple of years. We've also looked at housing delivery against the local plan target and whether or not a parish is actually sort of on target for this. And we've also looked at what levels of affordable housing stock there are in a parish and whether or not they actually get any relets come up very frequently. We've then coupled this sort of statistical information with sort of officer knowledge where we have it of an area, and in particular if we know that there's an area that's really keen to sort of deliver some more affordable housing. And we've currently identified sort of 27 parishes, which also includes some clusters of parishes where the team are going to initially focus their time. The team are going to make contact with these parishes over the coming month, in the next 4 weeks or so. But the list will obviously change as time goes on. But we are also keen to sort of make sure that, you know, if you haven't heard from us in the next month, that we do hear from anyone that is interested in delivering sort of any affordable housing. So we're keen to support all parishes where it's possible. We work closely with partners like Cornwall CCLT. We can't do this work on our own, and with other registered providers. So much work that needs to be done. And we can all help to develop schemes. As I was saying, we're part of a team of dedicated officers that covers the whole of Cornwall. And if I can just share with you, actually, our team, I think I can do this, hopefully.
Yeah, that's visible.
Yeah. So as you, hold on.
I've done it already, Sarah.
Oh, wait a minute.
Is that what you wanted, the map?
Hold on, I've lost my notes now. 1 second. Yeah, so can you see the map?
We can see the map of the affordable housing.
So what we've got is we've got the team split into areas. So you've got the east and the west of the county. So everybody has got a contact for their area. So for example, if you're down in St Just, Michelle Billing covers area 1. Or if you're in St Ives, so she would be your main contact. So I cover the whole of the county doing my work, but obviously I can't, I would be spread very thin if there weren't these other sort of contacts, but each of your areas. So, and then say, for example, the Helston, Campbell and Redruth area is covered by Julia Lansdowne. Nikki Mannell covers area 3 and area 4, which is like the Falmouth Penryn area, and then the Mid Cornwall area, which covers Truro right across over to Perranporth and then over onto the Roseland. And then you've got and then over on area 6, you've got Dean Mutton that covers that area. Up then above that, Padstow Weybridge area, you've got Richard Hawkey. So for the sort of Bude area right down to Launceston and quite a big area, Camelford, you've got Imogen, so Imogen Day, and then Sally Henthorne covers Liskeard and Saltash kind of sort of area of Cornwall. We do have another couple of members of the team that kind of like do other elements of work, such as our work with allocations for homes as well. So that's us. But I believe this will be sort of available to you all with the other presentation notes. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Sarah. And yeah, I'm sure everybody will be keen to get the hands on that map, so they've got the correct contact details for their area. That's brilliant.
And I was just going to say that the type of support that we can offer. So we can provide background information for parishes, like their housing. So we can come and sort of provide information about affordable housing in general. We can help with sort of looking at sort of potential land, considering sort of constraints and opportunities and land ownership. So we can do land registry searches to support communities for doing that. And we can support with like community consultation, and also with kind of identifying partners as well. So, and then one of the things that was mentioned earlier was to do with funding. And I was just going to sort of highlight about the council's revolving loan fund that is available to community land trusts. So that's a fund which is available to support the build process, and it's the rate, I think it's either 3 or 4%, I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but it's at the council's borrowing rate that we can actually borrow the money ourselves, and that's available from, and you can borrow between 75,000 and 1.5 million over an 18-month period, and that's available to community land trusts when they're building schemes. But we've also got the land remediation fund, which can support with costs where there's those additional costs on a scheme that were unexpected. All this information is available on our council's website. So if you just if you go onto the Cornwall Council website and you follow the affordable housing links, we do have a community-led housing section, and it's got all the links on there to our grant funding that's available. Also on that page, there's information about our rural housing toolkit, and I'm in the process of updating that, and that's actually quite a useful step-by-step tool for communities to undertake this delivery, supporting them to undertake this delivery themselves. And so that's being updated at the moment, and the new version will be available in hopefully by mid-May at the latest. So, but that's really helpful. It's got lots of information in it about how communities can do sort of searches for land and things like that, and finding partners and stuff. But I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, really helpful. Thank you very much for Sarah. I'll rush straight on to Emily now, if that's okay, and we'll take some questions after that. Emily, you ready to present or talk? Emily Rubin? I haven't got my list in front of me. She's been unable to stay.
You're on mute.
She's on mute.
Thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen there.
Not yet, we can't, I'm afraid.
Oh, right, I will try again. So I'm not used to doing this in Zoom.
No, I know, yeah. Something's happening now. Yes, we got it now, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So yes, thank you for the really useful, helpful introduction earlier from both Councillor Fairman and Alvy. So I'm Emily Rubin. I work in the council's planning policy team, and I'm going to take you through a bit of detail on our climate emergency development plan document, new policy document that's coming in, and I just give a bit of background about myself. I'm not an energy expert, but I will be talking to you mostly about our sustainable energy and construction policy within the DPD. So to give you an overview of what the DPD kind of is and what it's trying to do, it's a suite of new policies which have been prepared in response to the climate emergency that the council declared back in 2019. There have been 2 rounds of full public consultation, and it's been submitted to the Planning Inspectorate in November last year, which sort of kick-started the public examination process. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got the hearings in June. It's going to be the week commencing the 20th of June, and look out for details on our website. I've got a link later in the presentation, so you can see more details about kind of what's going to happen and where, as we're able to publish that. It's hard to say, but hoping that we might get the inspector's report in the autumn, which will give us some guidance on whether or not how we can proceed. Hopefully it will say that we can move ahead and adopt the document this year. without too many changes. And also, as previously mentioned, DPD is already starting to be used because it's at quite an advanced stage. So it's being used positively, which means to say that if an application comes forward with features or attributes that are mentioned in the draft DPD, then that gives it positive weight in decision making. But the document isn't being used to have weight to any refusals. So the scope of the document, I've just loosely clustered things to help you kind of find your way through it. So we've got coastal vulnerability and flooding, we've got green infrastructure, including the biodiversity net gain, themes that we talked about earlier, town centre diversification and densification. So it's understanding really that our town centres are changing, exacerbated by COVID in terms of their role. So diversifying uses, so it's not just dependent on retail. We can have other community functions and some housing in there, but also thinking about the public realm as well as densification, because you've got to think about amenity, of course. And then rural service and working hubs, thinking about shops and employment opportunities and centres. Low impact living and sustainable travel. And then we've got policy on renewable energy, so larger scale renewable energy schemes, and also I've underlined it here because I'm mostly going to focus on this, the sustainable construction policy. And the policies have been written so that they are, we believe, flexible. So we don't say you have to do things a particular way, so that we don't stifle innovation to future-proof things, because the technology is changing all of the time. And there's also going to be dedicated policy guidance to support the document to give further details. So that's in production at the moment. And we've also recently published our new Cornwall Design Guide that went live in December on our website. If you Google Cornwall Design Guide, also there'll be a link in here, you'll find that, and that provides more details on the expectations that we have for new development. So policy on sustainable energy and construction is called Policy SEC1, and it responds directly to the drive for carbon neutrality by 2030 mentioned earlier. High levels of fuel poverty. So before the recent energy bill crisis, we were looking at figures in the range of 11 to 13% of households, and that's slightly higher than the England average. So it's definitely an issue before, and I can already see it getting worse. And then also concerns that the new future home standards, which coming through the new building regulations, there's concerns that those don't go far enough or coming quickly enough. And we've been looking at other standards produced by REBA, LETI, other best practice, and looking at cost modelling and feedback that we've had for our consultations. So this policy does go further. It improves on the future home standards through pushing for better air tightness, ensuring renewable energy, and covering unregulated energy. There's different types of energy that you can model in homes, and unregulated energy is more about the kind of actual use, day-to-day activity and usage of your home. We believe that we'll be working in actual energy terms, kilowatt hours, so it's easier to monitor. Our policy will be coming in sooner, so there's thousands of new build homes built annually, so those households will benefit, and that reduces the need for retrofitting. And safeguards against the future home standards being delayed or diluted, but it is compatible, so it's our policy kind of just take things above and beyond. But when building regulations eventually catch up, we'll be delighted that the policy won't be needed. We would actually prefer the standards to be within the building regulations rather than through planning policy, but we're working with the tools that we have. So for new build homes, the policy will require an energy statement that will demonstrate that a series of thresholds are met. So space heating target demand of 30 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year, and a total energy consumption target as well of 40 kilowatt hours per metre squared per year. And there's also a requirement for there to be renewable energy for the home that will match the total energy demands of that home. So the preference for roof mounted solar, and that is because it's tried and tested, and the feedback that we had was that that's generally what people's preferences are. Where there are viability constraints, the priority will be placed on the space heating, either the fabric first and then the total energy consumption. And where there are technical limitations to renewables, for example, you might have an apartment block where there just isn't enough roof space for the renewable, for the solar PV to provide the renewable energy, we would consider a contribution to a offsetting fund that we're setting up, but that would be by exception, and would still want the building to go as far as it can in meeting the policy requirements. And we're going to be providing more details on the offsetting option in due course. Just working on those at the moment. So some practicalities. As I said, we don't dictate how the building should be built, but for those who aren't directly involved with construction, here are some things that might help you meet the policy. So having a heat pump, high performance glazing, high specification insulation, designing out the thermal bridging, so gaps where the heat can escape, mechanical ventilation, heat recovery, and maximising the available roof area for solar panels in the design. So it's also really important that occupants know how to use the technology that they're given, and be aware of the maintenance and services issues there. And we also would really encourage monitoring the in-use energy, just to see what's working, and learn from that, and if there's any adjustments that can be made. So just briefly touch on the non-residential requirement, and that is for larger developments to achieve BREEAM Excellent, which is a more flexible framework to cover all the different uses that could be caught up in that. So retrofitting, so generally, well, often planning permission isn't needed for adaptations to homes, but where it is, we will give significant weight to improvements where energy efficiency and carbon reduction in carbon emissions are able to be made. There is support for solar panels, especially where they minimise visual impact, especially to heritage assets and landscapes. And the policy also supports improvements to climate change resilience and sustainability of heritage assets, where they conserve or enhance the historical significance, and they facilitate the sensitive reuse where they're in disrepair. So that's really saying that these changes can really help the future of heritage assets. It's a positive thing. So further requirements is also not particularly onerous water demand threshold there for all new dwellings. We weren't able to have anything lower than that because we're not in an area of water stress. And then for large developments, some water efficiency measures as well there. And there's also provision for prioritising previously developed land and reusing existing buildings, and careful use of soil and resources, using locally distinctive materials which are resilient to Cornwall's climate, sort of granite and slate, things like that, as is appropriate to that area, and incorporating space so that people have got space to put their recycling, and thinking about the life cycle of the development and the spaces around it, just to think about what's going to happen next and make sure that's as sustainable as possible. And we don't actually have a threshold for embodied carbon, as we don't have a technical evidence base for it nationally. It is an issue. It's something that's coming through, and it's something that we'd look to in the future, I think, to see how we can resolve that. But it's not for this document. But these are things that we're encouraging, certainly, thinking about minimising waste there. So if you want to know more, some links I mentioned, we've got the climate change DPD link there. It's got the latest draft, it's got the evidence, and we'll have updates on the examination shortly. I've got the Cornwall Design Guide, which was adopted at the end of last year, and that sets out further details on our expectations. And it covers all sorts of things: inside buildings, outside buildings, public spaces, access. Another imminent document is a plan for our places. This comes under the Prosperous Cornwall 2050 stream of work that we've got, and it's a very high level long-term strategy for the next 30 years. It does include the importance of energy efficiency, and this document's really going to sets the tone for our next local plan, which we're starting to think about. It covers lots of different topics as well, so it relates to transport, economy, all sorts of things. So yes, that's me. Thank you for listening.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Emily. That's been fantastic. It's generated a lot of stuff in the chat bar. And I, through my poor chairing of allow Story, run straight over the Q&A session. So I'm going to kindly ask whether you and Sarah would mind trawling through the chat bar and responding to the specific points that have been raised, so that everybody can get an answer to their questions, and then that would allow all of us to take a break, which would be good. That would be fantastic if you could do that. And I'm guessing, actually, I was going to ask at the end for themes of another seminar in the autumn. There seems to be lots of questions that would apply to how the next local plan is going to be shaped. There's lots of questions around, should we building on greenfield sites? Do all exception sites need to be on the outsides of villages and those sorts of things? So you can do your best to answer those questions, but I'm guessing it might be, if people might think that would be a useful topic for an autumn webinar around how Cornwall shapes its next local plan, that might be something we can look at. But anyway, I'll leave you looking at the chat bar. Thank you very much. I'll give everybody else a break, and we'll reconvene at 11:20. When we're going to have a look through some of the practical elements of modern methods of construction. And so, yeah, I'd look forward to seeing you all again online at 11:20 precisely. Okay, thank you, everybody. Welcome back. It's 11:20, so we're going to go on to our next segment, which is all around, was from industry professionals, all around the modern methods of construction and how we can actually achieve this. I'm pleased to say that first up, we have Lydia and perhaps Katie as well. I'm not sure Katie's on the call, but Lydia anyway, from Trowers and Hamlins, who are international legal specialists with a strong presence here in the Southwest and a strong track record on affordable housing and construction. So Lydia, are you with me? Do you have a presentation?
Thanks, Dominic. I am, yeah. Just me today. Katie couldn't make it, but just me. But let me just try and share my screen with you all. Some slides. Hoping you can all see that now.
Yeah, that's shown up nicely. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. So good morning, all. My name is Lydia Stewart-Banks. I'm an associate at Trowers and Hamlins Solicitors. And then this morning, I'm going to talk to you about modern methods of construction and just give an update on the market and talk about key issues to consider when embarking on a modular project. But before that, just a little bit about Trowers and Hamlins. We're an international law firm with offices across the UK. Our Southwest office is in Exeter, where I'm based, and the firm's known to be at the forefront of social housing. And we act for sort of registered providers, local authorities, private developers, house builders, funders, consultants, amongst others. And nationally, we have the largest non-contentious construction practice, and we have extensive experience in sort of procurement, building contracts, ancillary documents, and just sort of anything construction related. So for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about what MMC is, then some contractual considerations to think about when entering into a contract with a manufacturer. And then I'm going to finish with talking about a survey which Trowers and Hamlins conducted in connection with modular housing in the UK. So what is MMC? So modern methods of construction refers to the improved methods of construction where the majority of the construction activity happens in a factory and is then delivered to the development site where the structure can then be assembled on site in a matter of days or weeks rather than several months as with traditional building. The process has been described as a way to produce more better quality homes in less time. And there's lots of advantages compared to traditional house building, including sort of speed on site, standardisation, reduced defects. And then we're now seeing more data showing that modular housing is more sustainable and energy efficient. The controlled environment of the factory allows for automated assembly without the unpredictable influences of sort of weather, temperature, daylight working hours, and reduced human errors. And NMC isn't a new concept. It's been across the construction sector for many years, for instance, in schools, student accommodation and hotels. But more recently, we've seen an increase in modular housing, inspired by government focus on the need to build more homes and on Homes England grant criteria. And in fact, the government's construction playbook highlights the use of MMC as key to improving quality in public sector construction. And Homes England now require their strategic partners to deliver 25% of homes using MMC. And they very much encourage the use of MMC on the affordable housing programme. So the MMC definition framework published by the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government has been developed and identified the 7 MMC categories as shown on screen now. So what this framework is, it explains the difference between category 1 and 2, which are the fully volumetric and panelised systems. And then the other end of the scale, we have categories 6 and 7, which refer to improved processes off-site. So when it comes to putting a contract together, there are some contractual considerations to think about, because with MMC, procurement of the project is different to a traditional scheme, with the main contractor taking responsibility for the groundworks and then subcontracting the manufacturer and installation to the manufacturer, or the manufacturer taking a lead role and assuming the traditional main contractor responsibility. So therefore, the form of contract needs to be carefully considered to understand the risk share and all the different parties involved. The nature of off-site construction projects isn't always compatible with traditional construction contracts, so certain common elements need to be considered when negotiating contractual arrangements, and these are on screen now. So we've got, for instance, ownership and risk. So as the modular units are constructed off-site, when it comes to drafting the contract, it needs to be specified who the owner is and at what point the client takes ownership. Is it at the factory, at the point of transport, or on site, or even upon construction? And then we also need to ensure that the manufacturer doesn't have any retention of title over goods once ownership has passed to the client. Drafting also needs to be clear on when the risk passes, whether it will pass on payment of the goods or at the point of delivery to the site. What should also be considered is a provision providing ownership in the off-site goods upon payment, and that could be supported by a vesting certificate providing some written assurance. And it's also vital to include a provision allowing the client or their representative to access, test and inspect the goods or materials whilst off-site, even in transit, and certainly during construction. Another aspect to think about then is transportation, because once the modular units are ready for delivery, they'll need to be delivered to site. So again, in the contract drafting, we need to ensure that obligations are included for safe and suitable delivery, insurance obligations and storage, whether on or off site, and for any damage. And this goes beyond the usual obligations to procure contractual risks or public liability, employer's liability and PI insurance. Then when it comes to payment, something to consider is using milestone payments rather than the standard monthly payments, because it offers better security and reduces the risk of being left out of pocket. And then something else to think about is accreditation and insurance. So any building contracts and appointments will need to reflect the requirements of any accreditation scheme, as well as any latent defects insurance. So the purpose of the accreditation is simply for the modular build aspects, and that process involves the accreditor, whether it be like BOPAS or NHBC accepts. They will carry out a review of the off-site product and make inspections at the factory. And the accreditation provides assurance regarding the lifespan of the product and aims to assure mortgage lenders that a property will be mortgageable for at least 60 years. And then ideally, this should be underpinned by warranty provision from NHBC or LABC, who'll provide insurance-backed cover for any defects. Something else that's current at the minute is that the Offsite Homes Alliance is currently developing an NMC PAS standard at the moment with CLUCH, a performance hub with a stakeholder group that's widely accessible. And then what I just wanted to touch on now is a survey which Trowse and Hamlins conducted in August 2021 across the public and private sector housing to understand whether the renewed impetus and focus on use of MMC has driven any change in the sector. So our survey results showed that when it came to funding public sector homes, around 50% have been funded by government grant. And that isn't surprising to see given the strong lead taken by Homes England to encourage the use of MMC. And further survey results showed that when questioned as to whether it was harder to obtain funding for the project compared to obtaining funding for a traditional scheme, 67% had said there was no difference. So these findings show that barriers are being broken down and revealing some greater confidence in the longevity and viability of modular housing. And then in our latest report, which we published in March this year, we found that build quality and costs are among the key drivers across the public and private sectors. The need for less labour when building with volumetric and panelised systems was also a motivator. And that isn't a surprise given the construction industry is facing this skills and labour shortage. Equally, the argument for sustainable development and energy efficient homes is very high on the list as a driver for using MMC. So this undoubtedly reflects the increasing move towards and pressure for funders and developers to transition to net zero carbon. So our preliminary findings from our survey demonstrate an increasing appetite for using modular and demonstrated that parties across the housing sector are willing to consider innovative solutions to overcome some of the hurdles. But the MMC is generally viewed more positively as an alternative to traditional build. So well, thank you for listening today. If you have any questions, please ask them during our next Q&A session. Alternatively, my details are on screen now, so feel free to drop me a line if you would, if you'd like sort of any more information, perhaps about our surveys or our reports. Otherwise, I'll pass you back to Dominic.
No, thanks very much, Lydia. That's very thought-provoking, actually. It's obviously going to be a huge part of the story going forward, modular building, and it's good to get some of the details on some of the, perhaps some of the issues you don't immediately think about when it comes to brought to the forefront. So no, thank you for that. That's brilliant. So we'll move straight on next to Phil Blackmore, who's the Regional Procurement Manager at Southwest Procurement Alliance. They're a non-for-profit organisation hoping to facilitate, social housing and public buildings and make them all, cheaper for us all. So where are you, Phil? Are you?
I'm Dominic. I'm here.
Right.
Yeah. Just like some others, we're used to using Teams, so using Zoom's a little bit different. So I'll just hopefully this works.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can you see the slides?
Not quite yet.
No. Let's try that one.
Yeah, something's happening now. Yes.
Yeah.
So if you want to make that full screen or not, then that would be ideal. We're there. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. Hi everyone. Hope you're well. Thank you, and thanks very much for asking me to speak to you all today. So just a quick introduction. My name's Phil Blackmore. I'm the Regional Procurement Manager at Southwest Procurement Alliance. I joined in December 2020. I've worked as a procurement professional for around 15 years across a number of industries and sectors, including healthcare, social housing, and construction. I'll be touching very briefly on the benefits of MMC. I know Lydia's kind of touched on a few of them. And I'm sure you're fully aware of some of them as well. But I also want to particularly focus on, just because of my profession and my role at SWPA, is the procurement barriers to adoption of MMC and how contracting authorities and procurement framework providers can help overcome these barriers and ultimately build affordable homes and combat the climate emergency. So SWPA are part of the LHC group, who've an established kind of construction framework provider since 1966, and my particular region cover the southwest of England. The frameworks cover refurb, retrofit, compliance, traditional build housing, and we've also got our off-site MMC for new homes framework, which has been going since about 2015 and has proved very successful. We at SWPA are very committed to combating the climate crisis and helping public sector organisations to build affordable homes. And we recently made the decision not to renew our traditional housing framework. So we're fully concentrated on the MMC and offsite market. So what are the benefits of MMC? Speed. MMC projects can deliver time savings of between 10 and 50% of construction time, which may mean opening early and the revenue benefits that brings, or the ability to deliver a project within a specific time deadline. So for a school term, for example. Quality, it's much easier to control the quality of the finished product once you have a more meticulous process and are carrying them out in a controlled, dry, easily accessible environment. Consequently, defects are reduced as these are captured at source and the fit and finish is better. Sustainability, the use of MMC is a direct impact on the sustainability and carbon content of a project, both in construction and in use. This is down to more rigorous design processes, factory quality control, reduced waste, higher levels of air tightness, and fewer transport loads. Safety, so activities in an MMC process are more predictable, with a consequential reduction in risk due to improved efficiency and productivity. Also, more site work is moved to the factory environment, meaning a reduction or elimination of working at height, and better separation of personnel and vehicle movements, and the ability to introduce mechanical assistance. Reduced disruption. Not only do MMC processes reduce the time required on site, but as a direct side effect, there is less need for site space for car parking, welfare facilities, material storage. And this has a direct impact upon the locality and reduced traffic movements with less disturbance to the residents in the vicinity. This is particularly beneficial in certain environments such as hospitals, schools, and densely populated areas. There are also a number of wider societal advantages, including better building performance through robust design processes and better quality control processes, meaning that the performance of the building is more predictable and level of defects initially and longer term are lower. And through a fabric first approach, the cost benefits for the end user are substantial, because in a world where gas and electric costs are obviously through the roof, and the costs for estate maintenance teams will also be significantly lower. And improve social value. So whether that be through the fact that jobs in the factory environment are safer and more sustainable, and also offers employment opportunities to individuals with caring responsibilities or disabilities. There are multiple benefits to be obtained through the shift of work away from the construction site. So we're all aware of the most common perceived barriers to the adoption of MMC, including the perception of MMC being higher cost versus traditional, and the schemes having to be a certain size to make it viable, and also the uncertainty around quality of construction. It's also likely that public procurement in the UK has been a contributing factor to the blockage of MMC, so I'll just touch on some of those barriers now. Supply chain resilience. So poor supply chain resilience can affect profitability and fundability of projects. In this regard, a fairly big barrier to the take-up of MMC is seen to relate to its lack of well-established supply chains. Recognising this was a major issue, back in 2017, I think, David Mosey developed and introduced the FAC1 Framework Alliance contract. The idea behind it is that it combines the features of a framework contract and an alliance contract to achieve a strategic and collaborative approach to procurement, connecting multiple projects, integrating team members, and improving value. We believe that supply chain resilience starts from having a collaborative approach and focus on alliancing. And with the FAC1, this promotes an overarching theme which seeks to align objectives and interests. It promotes a joined up approach to achieving supply chain resilience. Specifications. So legally, when drafting specifications for a preferred solution, the contracting authorities should not draft too narrowly or widely in order to rule out or unduly favour any potential workable solution which may meet its particular needs. So not knowing how to draft specifications for a new type of solution, or to draft them wide enough so as to not inadvertently discriminate against that new type of solution, may have been a barrier against the adoption of MMC in public procurement. The Construction Innovation Hub identified defining the need as one of the biggest obstacles to the growth of MMC solutions. This is now changing, and with the creation of frameworks and dynamic purchasing systems which public bodies can opt in, and effectively provides them with ready-made solutions. Costs, so the upfront costs, like I said, are perceived to be generally a lot higher than versus traditional. But we've proved that during a recent call off, by combining pipeline and aggregating volume with two public sector clients, that MMC is actually more cost effective than traditional. The key was obviously the aggregation of volume to create a larger pipeline, but we also benefited from standard house types. And obviously there are a number of whole life cost benefits that MMC delivers for both the tenants and the asset maintenance teams. But generally, depending on how the evaluation process is carried out during a tender, modular solutions may find themselves at a disadvantage at the evaluation stage. So procurement authorities need to structure the cost evaluation through whole life running costs, and procurement need to move away from traditional transactional risk-averse approaches to recognise the value in MMC. So whole life costing is permitted under the public contract regulations as a means of carrying out the financial appraisal of tenders. And with the government's procurement green paper, what used to be MEET, so most economically advantageous tender, we should now be looking at MAT, so the most advantageous tender, which helps to kind of eliminate the thought of cost being the most important factor when evaluating tenders. And the final one is innovation. So it's imperative to innovate in construction, and that's never been greater. Productivity and sustainability issues, including net zero carbon, need to be addressed, and resilience design into our buildings. MMC exists to help facilitate this change, but business as usual procurement methods are a frequent barrier to its adoption, particularly for SMEs. Too often it's presumed that if common best practice is followed, then the best outcome is achieved. The results are often compliant, but inflexible, tried and tested procurement that leaves no room for innovation. One of the changes that can be made to nurturing innovation, deliver improved outcomes and removing barriers is by early supply chain involvement. There is a lack of visibility for the offsite supply chain, and this needs to be addressed and aligned with traditional methods, with existing pre-qualification tools, etc. With the government introducing a new competitive flexible procedure, as outlined within the green paper, it means that contracting authorities can design their procedures to fit their procurement, to encourage innovation and allow them to engage with the market more effectively and proactively. Just a couple of slides to finish off. So how can contracting authorities procure effectively to ensure they obtain the benefits of MMC and help tackle the climate crisis? So as I've mentioned, early engagement with the supply chain, collaboration, aggregation, standardization, it works, we've proved it. And we're now pushing that particular piece of work with new public sector clients through our Easy as 1, 2, 3 campaign. And innovation, procurement rules in the past have hindered contracting authorities to introduce innovation, but that's changing. And recently we've launched our low carbon offsite housing DPS in conjunction with a new innovative digital toolkit. So we thought with a developing, emerging market, we felt that a DPS was the way forward because of its flexibility and always being open for applications, and would significantly help smaller companies who offer all types and categories of MMC get themselves in the public sector shop window more frequently versus a traditional kind of 4-year rigid framework. More than happy to forward information to anybody who's interested to learn a bit more about that. And finally, we've got just very quickly the benefits of procurement. So particularly in my sector with regards to frameworks and DPSs. So they remove the need to undertake costly, time-consuming ODU tenders. There's a significant reduction in procurement timescales from anything between kind of 6 to 9 months to as little as 4 to 6 weeks. Obviously, that means there's reduced procurement costs. It's market tested. We've already engaged with the market. There's pre-agreed terms and conditions, exceeding prices that could be further reduced by competition at call-off, and the use of modern model specifications. So that's me, as you'll be pleased to know, but that's just, I think when the slide pack gets sent out, there's my details if anybody's got any further questions for me at a later stage.
Yeah, thanks for that, Phil. And that's generated quite a bit in the chat bar. So you know,
I'll work my way through that if you want.
Feel free to have a look through what people are saying, and respond if you feel you want to. That's great, and really interesting, and yeah, good to see how fast this is moving forward. So next we're going to go to Coastline Housing, who we're all aware who Coastline are. They build lots of affordable housing in Cornwall. Peter Keane, I'm hoping, is on the call with us. I can see Peter, well done. And he's going to talk about, you know, the cost of construction standards in today's climate. So very local and very very relevant. So Peter, are you just going to talk to us, or do you have something to share?
I do have some slides. I just
okay.
I'm technically inept, so let's just see how it goes.
There you go. It's warming up, and there we have it. Yeah, ideal.
You got it?
Yeah, we got it. If you just want to put it onto slideshow or full screen or whatever the yeah.
Is that better? You guys see it?
You were nearly there.
I have no idea.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's, I mean, that's legible from my point of view, but I'm not going to.
Hey, can you guys all hear me? Sorry, I've got a dodgy
throat. I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Oh, great. Sorry, just the ends of COVID at the moment.
Oh dear.
Wonderful.
Sorry to hear that.
So yes, so my name is Peter Keane. I'm a commercial and technical manager at Coastline Housing, which means I spend 50% of my time playing in mud, like sites like that. So that's tends to be what I do. So I oversee the quality of what's being produced. So sort of work alongside our EAs, employees agents, sorry, and clerk of works, just to make sure that we are improving standards throughout and addressing issues at the same time. So I'm going to talk to you today about the cost of construction standards in today's climate. Specifically, I'm going to talk around the new building regulations that are due to be implemented in the next couple of months, and the impact that is. But firstly, just sort of wanted to cover off, come on, work, please work. There we go. Just to give a bit of background of where we are at the moment. So we've seen significant increases in construction cost, and these are due to various interlinking factors. So we've had Brexit with supply chain, etc., and a loss of skilled and unskilled workers. COVID, the industry is slowly recovering, but it came to a halt 2020, and then we had sort of drop-off points throughout 2021 as kind of the pandemic happened, etc. Labour shortages. This isn't just to do with Brexit and the changes there. This has been a lack of investment for decades within the industry for skilled and trained workers. In December 2021, there were 42,000 vacancies within the building industry. Again, with shortages, we see a rise in the costs. There's various stats around that, but certainly a lot of contractors are finding it difficult to find trades, and we've seen an increase in skilled and unskilled workers as well, which hit budget costs. And a lot of these aren't pre getting the contract signed. This is whilst works are carrying on, and we've had examples of block workers walking from one site to the next because they're getting an extra £10 a day, and that having significant delays on projects. Materials shortages, again, throughout 2021, we saw those shortages on sites causing delays, particularly classic around, well, it seemed to be a week-on-week type thing. So 1 week it will be timber roofing battens, the next week it'll be glass, the next week it'll be UPVC for windows, and then it'd be plaster, and then cement and sand, etc. So all of those things had a knock-on effect with programs on sites, and again, the running costs of those sites as well. I think from recent information found, we saw that in building new properties, there was over an 18% increase in the cost of materials, and for repairs and maintenance, which Coastline also do, we've seen a 19.5% increase in those materials as well. We've got the war in Ukraine that's going on at the moment, so Russia banning certain products, and then we're cutting the reliance of oil from them again, and the impact is not just vehicles and cars, it's things like kilns and furnaces, it's how we make our bricks and things like that. So it's all the background energy that's required as well to produce some of these materials. We've seen fuel increase, so petrol increases, we've got inflation that's going up, and then on top of that, we've got a booming housing market, which is great in one sense, but also we've got people who are doing upgrades, they're buying and selling properties. So again, that's all demanding on materials and labour. So again, that's for those who like graphs and things like that. This is from the Office of National Statistics, so that shows the price increases, etc. And then just some abbreviations there. Competing markets as well has also been a considerable issue. You got the next slide? New building regs, does that come up?
Yeah, sorry, yes, that's visible. Yeah.
Sorry, I can't, my screen is different to yours. So
no, that's right, new building regs. We're on.
Okay, so the building regulation changes that have been implemented from June this year make it mandatory to cut carbon emissions, new homes by 30%. And some people say, well, these are not going far enough. And I think it was opened up at the beginning that we are not going to be hitting this 1.5 degree increase at all. So we got Part L, so looking at energy efficiency in properties. There's various different ways of doing that: thermal efficiency, so bridging, heating systems, etc., PVs, increasing thermal U values within the property. We've got Part F, which is looking at improving ventilation to reduce air pollution within properties. So using mechanical extraction ventilation and MVHR, so heat recovery systems as well. Part O, ensuring we're not overheating. And again, so getting rid of unwanted solar gain, how we can orientate properties better, standards for glazing, standards for openings as well. And then Part S as well, which is around infrastructure for electric vehicles, so requirements to have those installation within properties to future-proof. So the impact of the regulations. Now, so according to BCIS, several house builders have anticipated costs of implementing new regulations and they estimate increases around 5.5%. Again, there's some other stats there, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. They're saying there's Part L standards, potential uplift of £3,000 to £5,000 per unit. Randall Simmons, who we work with, they did a review back in April 2021, and they were looking at the costs of sort of particularly around housing estates, so particularly what we do in terms of construction, and uplift costs to compliant with sort of new future home standards, etc. They estimate sort of uplifts between £13,000 to £22,000 per property. The difference being the type of construction, so sort of current modular construction or versus sort of SIPS panels, etc. Partes, so again, there's caps around that, but sort of 3,600 per point. We have noted, though, with regards to that, we have a site where it was discussed that electric vehicle charging points were to be installed in all properties. Now, that wasn't actually done in the end, but the grid came back and said, if everyone plugged their car in, we could not sustain it. And so the knock-on effects outside of, whether the grid can provide that. There's more grants available, which is great, but also that creates demand. So people are wanting to upgrade their properties, and increase in sort of new specialist products and technologies. We have seen leads to increased costs as well, shortages and delays on our projects. So just a couple of examples of sort of our experience here. So a number of projects, we have a tender stage, and they've now been reviewed because of the new regulations that are coming in. We've got one project there, which is 52 properties, 3.7 million. Contractors informed us that they're looking to increase the cost by 5 to 10% to meet the new building regulations, but this isn't guaranteed. So they have said that that could change depending on availability, demand, and then the driving costs of that, and also the things behind that, again, fuel availability, skills, etc. With another project, 6.6 million, uplift costs on those, they're a bit more specific around air source heat pumps. So 245k, underfloor heating, then there's no point in really installing underfloor air source heat pumps unless you're doing underfloor heating with it. And then there's a whole load of works behind that to ensure that those lower emission energies are going to be more efficient within the property. We've got a smaller one, 25 properties, again, uplifts there. There's a review of ground source heat pumping, but also looking at PVs as well. Another thing that we have what's the word, opportunities to deal with is biodiversity net gain, and that's a requirement that we need the planning permission stage to achieve 10%. The pressure we've seen is that it means we're building less homes per site, and also whether we're doing off-site contributions, so we're having to offset it because we can't meet that target. Again, that increases costs, and so I say I'm talking about money. I'm not saying these are bad things at all. These have financial impacts on us as house builders, and within our budgets as well. So so one of the big impacts, sort of tying up really, is additional construction costs need to be absorbed within our project costs. There are some funding available out there to assist us with these things, but we're fighting with a market where the costs are just going up through the roof currently at the moment. So this has led to changes where contractors have come to us and offered cheaper materials and construction methods, not necessarily better, but ways of saving money. We've had compromises around constructing retaining walls. The impact of that is on gardens. So Cornwall's not the flattest county in the UK. So where we're building on lots of hills, etc. And the impact of that is that if we're not constructing retaining walls, then that impacts on people's gardens and access to their gardens, etc. We've seen delay in work starting because we're having to renegotiate contracts. And then we're having one of the biggest issues is quality. As contractors, they get hit with the costs going up. They have labour shortages as well. And so when we're inspecting properties, we are coming across a number of consistent quality issues. And then trying to get them to address those within the contract can be quite tricky at times. There are some recent reports come out that the increased costs are now having an impact on the commencement of house building projects. And there's some details there about sort of the decrease in brick orders and block orders, whether that's an indication, and they do that through sort of, they average out throughout the seasons, etc. Granted, you wouldn't really want to be putting up bricks and blocks in these winter months. And also there was an article just around residential developments, looking at some of the evidence that's coming out, scaling back, and they're seeing drops in sort of the start of projects. Now, other findings disagree with that, but that's certainly something we're aware of and we need to keep an eye on. And sort of finally, really, so these are challenges, but they're opportunities as well. And building greener and more affordable with increased costs, we have to be a bit imaginative. We need help from all sectors. So it's great to hear about MMC. I think that's fantastic. Agree with that and want to work with that more. We need assistance from local authorities as well, planning groups, etc. So it's to help us in terms of what we're building and how we're building these, orientation of properties, etc. So we can really maximize PV. We need to talk about and have conversations around where we make compromises in terms of construction and meeting. You know, we don't have a lot of choice around meeting regulations, but the type of properties we are constructing. And we have a housing crisis, but we also have a climate crisis at the same time. The two aren't mutually exclusive. And again, there's opportunities to address both and work together as both. There's some acknowledgements there at the bottom, but yeah.
No, thanks for that, Peter. That's really frank and honest, and really good to get a realistic view of what it's like on the front line of construction of affordable houses in Cornwall. I think lots of people will be nodding away in agreement with lots of the points you made. Again, if you could have a whiz through the chat just to see if there's any points you'd care to pick up on, I'd be grateful, because we're obviously running a little bit behind time again. And I'm next going to go, with no further ado, into introduce Tim Kitchen, who works for a long-established Cornish building firm, Percy Williams and Sons. And you're the project manager, I believe, Tim, who oversaw the Fair Glen development in Hale. Is that right? Tim, are you with us?
Yes, I was going to have a conversation with Tim. I think Tim.
All right.
Tim,
Okay.
You there? Yeah, the Fair Glen project. Tim was commissioned in while I think he's unmuting himself, hopefully. Tim was commissioned to project manage the delivery of Fair Glen, and which is 20 passive houses in Hale. Simon Williams is a member of our board, and is of course director of Percy Williams, which was the development company that I think is well known to a lot of people in especially West Cornwall, delivered this particular project, and CCLT came and looked at the project while it was mid-construction. I met Tim and other members of the team at the time. Tim, are you there now? So I don't think I can answer the question, so I'm going to put to you myself. Is Tim there? I thought I saw Tim earlier.
Hello, Andrew. You can hear me now.
Hello, Tim. Oh, good. Yes, good. So, I just thought I would just give a brief introduction to you, and would take us through this process. I mean, particularly from, if you like, the coalface itself of constructing the properties themselves. It's all very well, if you like, talking in theory about how MMC works. There's a lot of discussion about MMC, very little about passive house. And of course, you came at this project from the background of someone who was trained in traditional building, techniques, and a lot of experience in that in the past, and then we're asked to oversee this particular project. And I just wondered, just from your own point of view, in what way is the building of a passive house different to that of a traditional build, just for people who have no experience like myself?
Well, the passive house project itself was a concept between Simon and John Stengel-Hoffman, who used to work for Lily Warren Partnership. Mm-hmm. And they came up with a scheme where they wanted to try and prove that you could build a passive house at the same price as you could build a conventional build. When we started the project, there was very little knowledge about passive house building in Cornwall at all. And certainly there was none being done to that scale that was privately funded. A lot of the housing associations were trying to do it, but one of your other colleagues mentioned earlier that they were struggling tremendously with building standards, airtightness layers, and that's where the critical bit with a passive house comes in. Passive house is a bit like saying every vacuum cleaner is called a Hoover. Passive house is controlled entirely by the Passive House Institute in Germany, and every single element of what is done has to go through that accreditation process. So we were overseen by a company called Warm Associates in Plymouth, who came down to inspect foundations, insulation under floor slab construction, wall constructions, type of wall ties, type of windows, airflows, type of taping on ceilings and walls, type of airtightness behind plug sockets. None of those things would be applicable to a conventional build of 2 skins of blockwork with 100 mil cavity.
Right, and so can you briefly describe what the fair game project was? I mean, when we discussed this before, you kind of explained that you had to kind of change the approach or the way that you had approached building contracts, and of course you then had to get a team of builders who were equally trained in traditional methods, and then had to see whether they were capable, well, not capable, but were prepared to change their approaches to the construction of properties.
Well, that's exactly that was where the first problem occurred, is that because most of them had a background with apprenticeships in conventional 2-skin block work, they didn't know anything about the density of the underfloor insulation, how airtight that had to be. And we met with quite a few that was a bit, apprehensive. Why are we bothering to do this? This isn't what we belong to do here. And that was the ethos that they had. So it was going back to school for the first 6 weeks to say, right, we can't do this, we can't do that, we have to do this, we have to do that. I researched it for 6 months. So at least I had the background in being able to say, this is how we'd like to do it, this is what we need to do, this is what we need to achieve. But that, for the first 5 houses, was an uphill battle. After that, everybody got into the groove and it went very smoothly. But the building techniques are very different. You can think about a normal floor slab, putting 300 mil of polystyrene insulation underneath that, 200 mil cavities, Teplo wall ties, which Jewsons and the other builders merchants had never heard of. And they're made of a mineral called basalt, and they won't conduct any heat. The type of windows, they came from Poland. They were sourced, outsourced by us. And in comparison, they're triple glazed, and they've got all special glass layers in them, so they allow solar gain in, but don't allow any solar exported. The wall ties won't allow any heat through them, and if you do a visualization with heat cameras, you can see that conventional metal wall ties conduct heat through the walls, and the basalt ones don't. The types of tapes we had to use had to come in from abroad. They couldn't be applied in humidity of more than 60 degrees. We were 100 yards from the sea. How are you going to do that? So they all had to be changed because we found they were letting go. So from the point of view of actually educating people and learning, it was an uphill battle for the first 5, but after that, it was much easier.
And in terms of getting that supply in, I mean, in the chat box inside, it's evident that that people are concerned about if we're importing all of this material from far afield, then is this not going to have a difficulty with regard to delivering projects on time, and also the impact on the local economy? You're muted at the moment, Tim. You're muted there. You just need to unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay.
Right. From the point of view of supply, I think most of the contractors in Cornwall will agree that once you get south of Bristol, most normal supplies stop, because as soon as you say we're in a TR postcode, your cost of transportation goes up dramatically and it's very difficult. looking at the carbon footprint on building, personally, I think is not entirely with value, because if you look at the carbon footprint of building now, but the carbon footprint is nothing for the next 75 years. And when you're looking at those houses at Fair Glen, you're looking at an energy cost of £1 a day. And when they get their fit tariff, it's coming out at 56 pence for a 100 square metre house with 2 bathrooms. Now you try marrying that up with conventional build, and it's very, very difficult. They're all fitted with MVHR systems. They only have one 2 kilowatt panel heater for the whole house. That's their total heating. There is nothing else.
No.
And it's all running at between 20 and 22 degrees constantly.
Right. And I know that a lot of people will be saying, well, do you have to do the full caboose, as it were? Do you have to do passive house? Can we learn lessons from this and take the best of passive house and still achieve, if you like, the similar levels of energy efficiency and long-term sustainability without having to go for the full accreditation? I think a lot of, in other words, are there things that you would, if you had to do it again, that you would take from this and carry forward, and other things which you might jettison on the way?
I think we finished the ones at Hale, and my wife and I then moved on to a project of 7 houses in Redruth.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, we worked back from all the things that were very useful for passive house. But passive house, you can build an energy and airtight house without going down the passive house accreditation route. And that's where the stumbling block seems to come, is the accreditation. MVHRs, I think it's already been alluded to previously, they will become compulsory in buildings that have a certain airtight layer on them. And to give you an indication, I spoke to one of the building control officers this morning. A conventional house, timber frame or concrete block, if it achieves an air test of between 4 and 5, it's classed as a pass. The airtight layers on a passive house have to be lower than 0.65. So achieve that, there's a huge amount of detailing. And again, it was alluded to about the quality control. The quality control on a site can only come down to the site manager and the site foreman. If they're not keeping their eye on the ball, then the quality will fall off, because so many people now are going down the route of getting all their subcontractors to give fixed prices. So they're fixed tender prices on whatever they do. We don't do that. And we were achieving air tests of 1.5 and 2 on a normal timber frame build without putting a huge amount of effort into taping and jointing and the airtight layers. So it can be achieved, and energy efficiency can be achieved quite simply by the quality control that goes into the build.
Thank you very much, Tim. I would love to go on, and there are more questions, and perhaps that'll come out in the questions at the end. But really very grateful to you for your advice on this one. I think that's been enormously helpful. But we do need to move on because of limitations.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I understand.
Thank you, Tim.
Okay.
So back to you, Dominic.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Tim. That was enormously enlightening to speak to or to hear from somebody who's actually done the work on this, and what is practical and what isn't practical. So there's a short introduction video there. There's more, which I'm sure we'll send you the link so you can watch the whole thing. But I'm very pleased to say that Lois is with us today to talk us through perhaps more on how they delivered a warm, affordable homes for local people in the Lune Valley in Lancashire. So Lois, I can see you on the screen. Do you want to unmute yourself? And
hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, got you loud and clear. Thank you.
Fab. Okay, right. I'm just going to see if I can run my presentation.
Thank you. Yep, that's visible.
Can you see my?
That's perfect, full screen and everything. Yeah.
Can you see my notes as well, or just the presentation?
No, just the presentation.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Right, I'll kick off then. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to speak. So I am Lois Hurst. I am a trustee with the Lune Valley Community Land Trust, which was founded in 2018, and it's led by a board of volunteers. We're all local people, and we've got a support of local membership. And so yeah, I'm on the board for the CLT, and also I was in the design team for the houses that we put together, which I'm going to talk about. I'm a recently qualified passive house consultant. I'm currently studying to complete a PhD looking at life cycle carbon and energy impacts of retrofit housing. And I'm 7 years into my own low energy retrofit just up the road from these houses. So I'm talking today about some 20 affordable homes that we're building in the Lune Valley in a small village just outside of Lancaster. We're partnered with a local housing association to deliver that. And we're developing this groundbreaking scheme. There's a summary on the screen just now about the sort of headline aspirations for the scheme, but I'm just going to be focusing today on the energy performance, which I've highlighted here. And you can have a look at those other things when in your own time. So firstly, yeah, we decided to build to passive house standard. It was interesting listening to the talk just before the break about Tim's experience of constructing in passive house. So what is passive house, first of all, if for those of you who are not familiar, it was a building standard originated in Germany in the early 90s. It's now really well established in the UK. And contrary to popular belief, it's actually a performance standard driven by comfort, not energy. But basically, it's a house with minimal space heating requirements, which is born out of very high performance building fabric. Passive houses use up to 90% less energy for heating and cooling than conventional buildings. And so we achieve comfort through all of the building fabric performance aspects. It doesn't prescribe what materials or building methods you can use. So it's material agnostic. You can apply any building method to passive house, and there have been lots of examples where it has been delivered. But yes, the fundamental underpinning of it is this very exacting performance criteria, fabric first approach. And it was the route that we chose for our homes here in the Lune Valley. I've put this graph on this slide, and I've highlighted the three clusters of data on the right-hand side show passive house data built to the passive house standard. They're all accredited buildings. So this was 106 homes. You can see, I don't know if it's very clear on here, but the graph is illustrating the modeled energy consumption alongside the measured energy consumption post-occupancy. And you can see on those three circled ones that the modeled and actual are really very, very similar. On the left-hand side of that graph, you can see that large cluster of higher bars. That corresponds to what I term, or what was termed rather, low energy buildings. And I think it's really interesting to look at the difference here. The low energy buildings are using nearly 4 times more energy on average over and above passive house. And the range is much greater in terms of the best performing and poorest performing ones that were in this study. So yeah, I'm going to go into a bit of detail about how the things we need to consider when we're building passive house, and then relate them back to our experience with the Lune Valley CLT. So basically, we begin with optimized orientation and window sizing. South-facing glazing is best for solar gain in the winter, which corresponds to free heating, which is excellent. You have to be careful to avoid summer overheating, but south facing also provides us with the easiest opportunities to shade in the summer, which means we don't have to introduce energy consuming air conditioning. We observe increased energy demand when we deviate from that south facing orientation. For example, if we have 30 degrees from south, then we see an increase in 10% of energy demand, and it's actually up to 42% more if we orientate due east or west. And this is important. I'll come to this in a moment, but it doesn't mean that all passive houses have to face south. The other consideration is the window sizing. Typically, we'd expect passive houses to have about 15% glazed area, which is apparently not uncommon in conventional buildings. But we're putting those windows, like I said, carefully orientated to gain the most solar gain. And then we have shading as well. We also want to be considerate to landscape shading and other buildings, etc. Then on the right-hand side of this slide, we've got the form factor. So the shape of the building can make a tremendous difference to how much energy it consumes. So you can see the example here is a terrace versus a bungalow. Basically, the amount of surface area that you have to the amount of treated floor area or thermal envelope that is functional space. Terraces are cheaper to build because there are fewer walls per house. You get shared walls between the houses, etc. So there are multiple benefits to giving good consideration to your form factor when you start off with your design. So this is an aerial shot of our homes in construction. This was taken just a few weeks ago. You can see we're deploying that form factor benefit. We've got small groups of terraces here. We were constrained by the topography, which meant that we couldn't run a continuous length of terraces from one end to the other. And also, I will reveal that these houses do not face south, they do face east-west. Again, this was another constraint of the specification. The community were involved in deciding how we wanted these homes to look, and we decided that having a pedestrian street which ran between the homes made for a really nice community feature. So the homes don't face south, but we are still on track to meet the passive house standard in spite of that. So it's best to face south, but it's not imperative. So then other considerations. Obviously, passive houses have a thick insulation. The insulation thickness is determined by calculation looking at a whole house model. And also we have no thermal bridges, which are designed out before we go to site. So thermal bridges are thin spots or gaps in the insulation which allow heat to escape. And we can mitigate this quite readily by using specialist materials to break that thermal bridge. Then we move on to glazing. So as previously mentioned, passive houses have triple glazed windows. In the UK, this isn't always required in warmer climates. But these are specified to meet the internal radiant temperature criteria, and this is a really important feature of the comfort. So internal radiant temperature on your windows means you won't feel cold drafts coming off the windows. And it also avoids condensation forming, so we don't get any of the internal condensation. The positioning of the windows is important. These go inside the insulation layer to avoid thermal bridging around the frame. And then we also move on to including very rigorous air tightness, which we've already heard about. It ensures that the warm air isn't lost through the building fabric, so we're not losing energy and therefore needing to provide more heat. But it also is really important in protecting the building fabric from moisture, which someone else mentioned moisture is a problem in the Cornish climate, as it is here up in Lancashire. So controlling moisture ingress into your building fabric is obviously imperative. Air tightness is tested throughout the project build using an air pressure test at key stages. And then obviously if we're airtight, then we don't have any ingress of fresh air. So we install mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. This has a heat exchanger to swap the heat out from the outgoing air back into the fresh incoming air. So we have constant supply of fresh air, but it's never cold air that we are feeling around the home. And it's powered by a few small fans, which obviously do use a small amount of energy, but it's much less energy than would be lost by other means of incidental ventilation. And also the systems are designed to be inaudible. I've actually got my system running right next to me just here, and hopefully you can't hear it. So the implementation of the passive house is about specification, calculation of heat losses, and rigorous quality control. And this is implemented with required expertise from passive house designer or consultant and a certifier. So sorry, that's not the right thing. So this is just a picture. You'll have all seen pictures a bit like this. It's a timber frame building. The difference here is that the insulation is thicker. We've considered air tightness right through from the construction detailing to implementation. And there's just a headline specification of the products and features we've installed. So we've got a cold roof, we've got external wall insulation cladding system. Rationale have provided triple glazed windows, and we've just passed our first air pressure test at 0.54, which was within the 0.6 limit. So is it affordable? That's the big question. Answer is yes. We've got a higher quality building, we've got better living conditions and comfort, and we've got fewer health complaints amongst occupants. So these are unquantifiable factors in many respects. And so how do you frame that amongst cost? If you look at the graph that we've got here, this is from the International Passive House Association. We can see that conventional buildings over their life cycle continue to cost money. If we go to passive house, then the monthly costs are much smaller. And if pressed, then if pressed to give a figure, the Passive House Institute estimates that costs are between 3 and 8% more for a passive house building compared to conventional building. But if we consider the life cycle, then it becomes significantly cheaper to go for passive house. So we can do affordable homes at very high quality with very good living conditions and internal comfort. So there we go. And I think that's it for me. Sorry, that was very whistle stop.
No, thank you very much, Lois. And I'd urge everybody to click on the link and watch the full video when you get a chance after this afternoon or later today. I'm just going to take one question from Kate, who patiently put her hand up early on in the presentation. Kate Muller, did you want to unmute yourself and ask the question you wanted to? You're still on mute, Kate. There.
I
You're
didn't
live.
put my hand up.
You did
Sorry,
put your hand up?
Sorry, I must have touched something.
Oh, that's okay. That's how it happens to the best of us. That's no problem. Okay, yeah, no, thank you. That's no problem whatsoever. Okay, brilliant. So thanks, Lois. I hope you'll hang around for the questions at the end.
Yes,
and also
absolutely.
keep an eye on the chat bar, because I'm sure that will spark a lot of chatter. And next, we're going to go to another community trust up in Mullen, Iona. And we're going to get a joint presentation from John Lee, who's an officer at Ecology Building Society, I believe, and Helen McDonald from the Community Trust. I can see, Helen, you're unmuted. So do you want to fire away?
First. Yeah, I'll just get my, hold on, to share screen.
Yeah, that seems to be firing
Is
up.
that okay?
Yep, there it is, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. It's great to learn more about the affordable housing sector in Cornwall and have the opportunity to share our own experience. I work for Mull and Iona Community Trust, or MICT as we're known. We're based on the Isle of Mull on the west coast of Scotland. We have a population of around 3,000 on Mull and Iona, and we face challenges of an over-reliance on tourism, lack of infrastructure, ferry issues, an ageing population and limited childcare. We have a very buoyant and enterprising economy, however it's completely constrained by a lack of homes, a high proportion of holiday lets and second homes and a very expensive housing market. MICT is one of Scotland's longest established development trusts, and we've delivered a broad range of social, economic and environmental projects over the last 25 years. We run Scotland's longest running community-led ranger service. We have an office building with rooms for hire, and we're home to the island's charity shop. We have a light industrial park, a pontoon and motorhome stances, a community transport scheme, and we recently bought a forest. Sustainability and reducing our carbon footprint is an important aspect of what we do. We've run several environmental projects over the years. We have a hydro scheme from which the profits are distributed locally, and all 5 vehicles that we own are electric. So it's just a bit of background to us. Alva Ferry is a dispersed community of around 120 people on the west coast of Mull. It's a beautiful corner of the island, a designated national scenic area. It's the gateway to Staffa and the Tresnish Isles, and it's very popular with wildlife enthusiasts. However, the area has no shop, pub, church or village hall, so all community life revolves around the primary school. And in 2010, that school roll fell to just 4 pupils and was threatened with closure. Ulva School Community Association, or USCA, was formed in 2011, and they launched a high-profile campaign and successfully fought to keep the school open. But USCA members soon realised that a lack of affordable housing options was causing people to move away, and particularly families. There were very few rental options locally. Much of the housing stock was old estate cottages, which were poorly maintained, expensive to heat, and tenants had no security. Coupled with that, over 30% of housing stock were holiday homes, and any available houses were beyond local affordability to buy. So USCA had the ambition to address this depopulation issue by building affordable rental houses, but they soon realised this was beyond their scope as a small community group, so they asked MICT for support in 2013. We secured funding from the Scottish Land Fund to purchase land from a local farmer and appoint me as project officer in 2014. And then MICT managed the project on behalf of USCA with a lot of community consultation throughout the process. And it was agreed to build 2 houses, family-size homes, which were bigger than minimum space standards, recognising that in very rural communities, people spend a lot more time working and socialising at home than in more urban areas. Passive house standard to address fuel poverty issues locally. Nearly 50% of people living on Mull were in fuel poverty before the energy crisis. And a design that was in keeping with the local landscape. Fast forward 3 years and 2 passive house standard 3-bedroom family homes were completed in June 2017. We used a local architect, Thornwinus Architects, who are passive house certified, and a local builder. We had a really complex funding package, including local authority and Scottish Government funding, grants from Quaker Housing Trust and Trust House Charitable Foundation, a mortgage from Triodos Bank, and additional loan funding from Quaker Housing Trust as well. We also ran a really high-profile crowdfunding campaign, which received over £60,000 in donations. It was difficult to convince funders at the time of the benefits of passive house construction, that there was any housing need at all in the area, and why houses should be built out with a main settlement. At the time, there were few communities actually delivering housing themselves, and the comparison was with social housing, which was very much geared towards volume building, as close to benchmark as possible, and not prioritising quality or sustainability, or looking at the longer term life cycle costs of homes. So a benchmark means absolutely nothing when you're building on an island. Our quantity surveyor confirmed that our build costs were 25% higher than an equivalent built in the central belt of Scotland due to additional ferry, infrastructure and labour costs. However, we were undeterred and determined to stick to the community's brief to build high quality houses, and eventually we secured the funding we needed. The houses were constructed using a cross-laminated timber frame, which enabled a short construction period and excellent airtightness, and all building materials were recyclable. The houses are light and airy and have significant solar gain from the large triple glazed windows. And with a mechanical ventilation heat recovery system, the only heating source is from a towel rail in the bathroom. So these were the first passive house standard community-owned housing in Scotland. However, at the time we couldn't afford to go through the certification process, so we lost out on the actual accolade to a really good housing development in the south of Scotland. We increased the primary school roll by 50% and the number of working age adults in the community by 10%. We won an award. We used a locally agreed allocation policy, which prioritised families and housing need to directly support the school. Our heating bills for tenants were just £350 per year. We charge a social rent level in line with local housing associations, and as a private landlord, we offer secure private residential tenancies. We received 19 inquiries and 8 applications for these 2 houses, which gave us the impetus to embark on a second phase of housing. So with ongoing housing issues across Mull, we decided to start on this second phase literally as soon as our tenants moved into our first houses. We secured feasibility funding from Scottish Land Fund and Scottish Government, and this enabled us to carry out really robust business planning, topographic survey, architects outline designs, pre-planning advice, housing needs survey, flood risk assessment. And we decided to go for a design and build contract this time round, whereby the contractor was responsible for the whole build, and including planning and design and managing subcontractors, and a fixed price was agreed in advance. This gave us definitive costs and timescales from the outset and minimised our risk. We knew that funding would be harder to secure this time round, and we wanted to be less reliant on loan finance and donations. We held a lot of community consultation events with USCA to work up our designs and discuss the allocation policy. We looked at various site options, and we were keen to explore modular construction options. Thanks to this feasibility work, we successfully applied again to the Scottish Land Fund to buy a plot and part fund my post again. We then worked closely with our quantity surveyor to create a design and build tender that specifically met the criteria of the Rural and Islands Housing Fund. This is a Scottish Government fund for communities and private landowners building affordable homes to meet an evidenced housing need. And we agreed to build 2 3-bedroom and 2 2-bedroom homes. And while these houses would not be passive house standard, low carbon energy efficient homes were still a very high priority for us as an organisation and also for the community. The Wee House Company were the successful bidders for the tender, and their modular construction methods really appealed to us. They prefabricate their houses at their factory in Ayrshire whilst carrying out site work simultaneously. And then the modules, which are 90% finished at this point, are taken to site for completion. And as we've heard earlier, this construction method has lots of advantages, such as enabling a quicker build on site, minimising construction traffic and related emissions by up to 50% over the course of a development. Building in a factory setting also enables more efficient building methods and up to 84% less waste packaging than on traditional sites. The houses are EPC-B rated, achieved through a combination of high quality insulation, increased air tightness, and the use of solar PV panels. This also enabled us to secure a mortgage from Ecology Building Society, who demand an EPC-B rating for new builds, but they're also incredibly flexible, and they offer loan terms of up to 40 years for community-led housing projects. We had a much more straightforward funding package this time round. The majority of funding came from the government's Rural and Islands Housing Fund, the mortgage from Ecology, plus grants from our local authority and the Scottish Hydroelectric Community Trust towards our £20,000 electricity connection costs. Our build cost turned out to be almost the same as phase 1, due in part to our significant infrastructure costs on this site, including flood risk management solutions for a 1 in 200 year flood prediction, and drilling not 1 but 2 boreholes for our private water supply. The first borehole failed 2 days before our tenants moved in, which was slightly stressful. So in total, the infrastructure costs of this project were 1/3 of our overall build costs. Our 4 houses were completed in May last year. The pandemic and Brexit didn't really delay the project too much, and thanks to the design and build contract, any additional unexpected costs were absorbed by the contractor and not us as the client. It would have been very difficult for us to secure any extra funding once the project was underway. I think the houses sit really well in the landscape. They complement our first houses and the larch cladding will weather down quickly to become unobtrusive. We received 31 applications for these 4 houses. They're energy efficient and sustainable homes. We've increased the primary school role by 50% again, to the point where the school has been able to employ a second-class teacher for the first time ever. We've increased working age population by a further 16%. We've won another award. Again, we charge social rent levels. Our tenants have affordable heating bills and secure tenancies. And fabulous views, it has to be said. So we built 6 houses in a community. Is that the problem solved? Well, no, the housing crisis has worsened on Mull, if anything. There's been a huge increase in short-term lets and second homes since the pandemic as people look to escape. We're losing houses to the short-term let market far quicker than we can build or retain them. A decrease in private long-term lets as changes to tenancy legislation in Scotland puts people off being a landlord. We've recently relet one of our 2-bedroom houses, and we received 13 applications for the one house from people living on Mull in genuine housing need. The social housing register doesn't quite capture this reality or the needs of people moving to Mull to take up work. We're currently undertaking a key worker accommodation study across Mull and Iona. Over 50 businesses and organisations have confirmed that they are directly negatively impacted by the lack of accommodation for staff. It's stifling our local economy and our public sector. As an example, our high school recently lost an English teacher who couldn't find anywhere to live, and now they're struggling to find a replacement. So new affordable housing delivery is essential. We've obviously seen the successes of doing so. However, I don't think we can look at it as the only solution. We can't just build our way out of the housing crisis. So we are working on a variety of projects to address these issues, to retain and increase the number of permanent homes on our islands. And we're very proud of the houses we've delivered, and I hope this demonstrates that delivering high quality, energy efficient homes is achievable. And as many people have been saying today, it actually should be the standard for affordable housing, and that communities can and should be at the heart of that delivery. Thank you.
No, thanks for that, Helen. Utterly inspiring, and with a cold dose of reality at the end of it, which will resonate with everybody in Cornwall. I know we face a lot of very similar challenges. Andrew, is John from the Ecology on the call?
I am indeed, yes.
Oh, yeah, they are, John. Okay, excellent.
Okay, just getting this slides moving.
Thank you.
Can you see that or not? No.
So we've got your screen showing, but we're not on slideshow yet. Yep, there we are. Perfect.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, hello everybody. I'm John Lee, Business Development Manager at Ecology Building Society, and I have particular remit to work with community-led housing projects as well as developers of high specification environmental new builds, as well as renovations and much besides. So a lot of what's been said this morning has been really, really interesting for me, and I think some common themes emerging around the way that the housing market fails to deliver the sort of solutions that communities need, as well as the challenges of building to genuinely energy efficient standards for the future to tackle climate risk and carbon saving measures. But just to give you a bit of a flavour, I think it was mentioned in dispatches by Helen and others that the finance sector probably needs to better understand the needs of projects like this. And I think I wouldn't wish to be arrogant and say that we do understand each and every project in detail straight away. The point is we need to listen and learn and have solutions that suit individual projects as much as is feasible with a financial instrument like a mortgage. And flexibility really is quite important. So very briefly, we're a mutual building society owned by our members. We're simply funded by their savings, and we lend some of those savings out to projects that meet our criteria. That's our head office in West Yorkshire, in a little place called Silsden, just on the edge of the Dales. You can't quite see the straw bale meeting room that we have around the corner there, but it's a very sustainably built property. and I guess we kind of have to practice what we preach in that regard, but a very pleasant place to work. And really, ever since we were formed in 1981, our mantra and mission has been to support projects that deliver sustainable impact, positive impact in terms of the land and buildings that we lend on, and that our savers expect us to do that in entering into a relationship with us as members and putting their personal capital with the society to support those projects. And we really do have a very well engaged membership of over about 12,000 members now, from very early, very humble beginnings in the early 80s, when we were sort of operating from a 2 up, 2 down cottage in a nearby village. Why are we focused on housing? Well, I don't want to labour the point too much. We've heard an awful lot already from speakers this morning about the challenges of retrofitting our existing housing stock. 28 million homes in need of retrofit, some of which are at very low standards indeed. Bringing down emissions to meet net zero targets. We've actually recently committed via a consultation process with our members to look to achieve net zero for our lending book by 2030, which will be quite a challenge, given that quite a lot of what we lend on is by no means passive house and new build. It's renovations and conversions of stuff that's pretty grotty. But across the whole piece, we do want to get as close as we can to having a positive impact in terms of zero emissions by 2030. And I do think that the finance sector is becoming under increasing pressure to report on where it's lending and what it's lending on, and what the impact is in terms of climate risk, which may help get some of the less, shall we say, enlightened members of the finance sector thinking about these issues in ways that aren't just about profitability. So specifically, I don't want to sort of labour the sales pitch too much, but we can provide funding for community groups. We work with groups on development phase finance, projects of up to £3 million. That's a regulatory limit for us in terms of our relative size. And we can lend at up to 80% of the prevailing loan to value of the security that's mortgaged to us. And we release funds in stages so that you're not paying interest on money before you need it. And if you don't need it all, we don't charge you for it. You just pay interest on what you've borrowed. There's no hidden sort of non-utilization fees, as they're known in the industry. And if the CLT or the trust or the co-housing group or whatever the structure is, then wants to retain ownership of those properties in the long term, we can provide long-term support supported by rental income and surcharges and so on over up to 40 years, as Helen was saying. And but if those units are then being sold to members, perhaps under a discounted market value model or a shared ownership arrangement, or even benchmarked against the local wage index, in the case of a couple of CLTs we've supported, we can lend to your buyers effectively to help them get mortgages on those properties, A, because they've been energy efficiently built or retrofitted, so they meet our ecological criteria, and B, quite a lot of the mortgage market isn't comfortable lending on what's known as restricted covenants, and you know, that's something that we're very keen on being able to support at Ecology. Okay, so just a couple of examples. This is another social housing passive house scheme in Scotland, up at Dumfries and Galloway, Nith Valley, and again, rather similar to Helen's story, really. There was a lot to like about this for us in terms of not only the commitment to certified passive house standards, which we recognise is, you know, probably the best standard in terms of performance post-construction, in terms of evidence of monitoring, but also the fact that it delivered affordable housing for 3 families in housing need in the area. And as Helen was saying, we recognise that there's often a lot of social and community benefits on the back of simply providing the housing, in terms of supporting local businesses, schools and other infrastructure. This was just a housing project, but we do lend where there are other uses such as work units, common houses, meeting spaces, community shops and all that kind of thing. At the other end of the spectrum from new build is renovating or converting old buildings, and this is a farmstead on the outskirts of Sheffield in South Yorkshire that was bought by a group of families who formed a co-housing company. So it's mutually owned by the co-housing group, and slowly but surely they're going through this project unit by unit to create homes for their members. They then sell them back to their members, sometimes with a mortgage from us as well, but we're not precious about that. They can go wherever they choose in theory to get their mortgage. But this is a really nice scheme that has an awful lot more to commend it, other than just the aesthetics of the internal shots. That's a before and after of one of the units that have been done. They've also done a lot in terms of permaculture on site. They have a district heating scheme. They have their own water purifications scheme running as well. It's well worth a look at their blog online. Actually, if you look up Open House Project, a lot more detail there. Some great photos. So very briefly, as I was saying, we can provide stage payments to release money in line with when you need it. And if you've got grant funding coming in, that's fine too. That may be spent first to keep the costs down. All that we insist on is having your first legal charge or a first standard security, depending on which side of the border you're in, to enable us to lend. And we can be flexible on when those stage payments are, depending on your individual cash flow and model. And if there's an issue with the land being particularly low value at the point at which you're starting to need money, which can be the case, we can provide advanced stage payments, which is where we're releasing money ahead of the value being on site. And that's particularly important perhaps for MMC, where a lot of the upfront costs are still in the factory until they're not in the factory anymore and they're on site. And so we're working actually on a model for that that hopefully will become a pilot project for residential buyers on MMC later in the year, talking to a number of providers of particularly sustainable MMC homes. So more news on that in due course, but it's fair to say we've done MMC mortgages for a number of years almost by accident as part of our self-build lending, but it's something that we do recognise is becoming more and more to the fore, and something that we want to support in a more visible and tailored way. Again, another project that had high off-site costs at Bunker down in Brighton. This is a housing co-op that initially wanted to build 2 properties for families that were members of the co-op, and that's actually smaller than we would normally look at for a housing co-op. We normally insist on up to 4 individual residential members if it's a single property, or 4 families if it's new build like this. What they were able to do was say to us, well, look, actually, if we can build these 2, we've got a waiting list of people who want the next 2 and the next 2 and so on. So we kind of took a bit of a punt. That's a rather nice before and after shot. That is 2 photographs. It's not a big hole on one side and then the house is on the right, okay? But again, very energy efficient design, modular construction off-site, which are then craned into the site, and a bit of creativity around how we released funds to make that happen. And a bit closer to Cornwall, but just, am I allowed to put things over the border in Devon on this forum? Am I going to offend everybody? We have lent in Cornwall as well, I have to say. Yeah, this is a CLT in Broadhemston in Devon, which was a group self-built CLT, and supported heavily by residents at the time that they were building this project, it needs to be said. And we were then able to step in and uplift their shorter term funding to put it to a long-term affordable model. And the residents will have a share in these properties. I think it's a 25% share with the option to buy additional shares as affordability allows them to. So again, it's having that creativity to understand the leases and the legals behind that, and what happens if somebody moves out, etc., which we feel we're able to spend the time on and do. And I'm afraid that isn't necessarily always the case. That banks tend to quite like things that are vanilla and don't touch the sides, whereas we recognise that projects like this need a bit of tinkering around with, let's say. So key issues for us, well, you know, we do want security. We're not a charity. We want something to secure the loan in case it goes wrong. If it's a new build, we might want some collateral warranties from your design consultant and lead contractor. We're obviously going to ask you about the ecological specifications, but every group we ever took to already is on that page anyway, to be honest. We'll ask about governance, who's running the show, what backgrounds do they have, what's the demand for housing, usually very high. And at the point of thinking about an application, we would issue a client with a formal illustration of what we think we can offer prior to them committing to any fees for valuations and application fees and so on. And I've touched on the flexibility aspect. So, you know, for us, I think that the key, as ever, really is about having good liaison with, and hopefully attracting more lenders to support projects in the sector, to be honest. Working with support networks, including the national and regional hubs, people like National CLT Network, UK Co-Housing, Radical Roots for co-ops, and of course the regional hubs like Cornwall CLT and so on. Finding valuers and lawyers that understand what we're on about, which is not always a given. And sharing best practice, telling the world that these projects can work, and you know, hopefully we can continue to do that and bring some new innovative MMC schemes into the mix as well, that we can do a good advocacy job. As I've said there, timber frame's still a bit modern for some mortgage lenders at the moment, which is pretty horrendous, really. And some more capital grants would be really nice to help some of these projects get off the ground, because it can't necessarily all be funded by debt. You know, affordability for residents is the key, and we don't want to be lending on projects where you're up against it before you start, especially in a rising interest rate environment, which unfortunately we seem to be heading into at the moment. Thank you for listening.
No, thanks for that, John. That's really that's great, and some really good case studies there for us all to get, you know, see it as it on the ground. Of course, we'd all agree with you about capital grants, and I think there have been some questions in the chat up to now about the Shared Prosperity Fund. We've had the headline figures. It would be good if some of that was directed towards affordable housing. Certainly would get my support. Yeah, so thanks very much for that. And we're going to come right back down to Cornwall again now for our final speaker of the day. So I think I've got George Gillow from Kenza Heat Pumps in Truro.
Yes, thanks, Dominic.
And I've done an exciting project in Stivians, I believe.
Yes, that's part of the work we're currently doing at the moment. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, smashing. Yeah, so I'm George Gillow. I'm the Southwest Area Sales Manager for Kenza Contracting. Kenza Contracting is part of the Kenza Group, which has been around in Cornwall now for just over 20 years. We started in Cornwall in Guy Cashmore's garage some 22 years ago in his back garden, and is now the largest producer of ground source heat pumps in the UK. We have our headquarters and brand new factory at Mount Wellington Mine, which is just outside Chasewater, and we'll be able to produce 30,000 heat pumps a year when it's at full capacity. So as I say, we've got 3 companies, part of the Kenza Group. Kenza Heat Pumps, who manufacture the heat pumps, based at our headquarters at Mount Wellington Mine. Kenza Contracting, who I work for, and that is a project management company which offers turnkey solutions to new build and retrofit industry on large scales. And also our brand new company, Kenza Utilities, which is very much involved in the Heat Streets project at Stivians, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But generally, Kenza Utilities will be able to own and maintain the infrastructure in the ground, which is the obvious part of the system, which gets the heat from the ground and puts it into the heat pump. So as I said, the company's been around for 22 years and making huge increases in growth. We started off basically designing and installing systems for one-off individual properties, such as self-builders, maybe in the rural areas with large with large gardens to put horizontal ground arrays in. Moving to our first retrofit social housing schemes, taking out night storage heating systems in 2008. This was for Daisyfield, I think, in Leeds, and also for Coastline Housing in St. Kevin. And then in 2017, we put in the UK's largest retrofit of heat pumps into 8 tower blocks in Enfield, North London. This was 403 flats. These blocks were 12 stories high and taking out gas boilers in each flat. We're also doing large-scale new build private luxury housing, such as the picture at the bottom there. That's at Perranporth, the Dunes for Acorn Housing. And we're now moving on to much larger village schemes, such as Stydians and new towns to be building with thousands of homes as part of our systems. So just a little bit onto the basics. How does a heat pump work? The ground source heat pump is 3 distinctly separate, hydraulically separated loops. You can see on the right-hand side of that diagram, you've got a blue loop. The blue loop is what we call the ground side, and that will basically pipe, which goes into the ground with a glycol mixed liquid inside it, and it'll go down into the ground through a borehole, possibly down a couple of 100 meters, to pick up the solar energy in the ground. It's quite important to remember this is solar energy, it's not geo, it isn't the heat energy from the ground. That's further than 500 meters under the ground. So this is solar energy, it's replenished by the sun. So that ground side loop will pick up around about 11 degrees, 10 to 11 degrees from the ground. My house in Cornwall, I've got a heat pump in Falmouth, and we are recording 13 degrees coming out of the ground at the moment. And it will take around about 5 degrees, but generally across the country, you can take 11 degrees from the ground and it'll go through that loop, transfer the heat through the first heat exchanger into the central antifreeze system. So that's in the box itself. Once it's got through that first heat exchanger, it'll transfer that 10 degrees to the refrigerant circuit. The refrigerant, once it's heating up, is such that that increase of 5 degrees temperature into the refrigerant turns it from a liquid state and boils it into a gas. Once it's in a gas, it can then be transferred to the compressor. You can see that sort of gold heat pump at the top, that sort of element which is gold. That's the compressor. That's the bit that takes the electricity from your electricity source, and it will compress that gas at 10 degrees. Once you compress a gas, it increases the temperature, and then it can take it up to the temperature you need. So for a normal heating system with radiators, your flow temperature of 50 degrees or 45 degrees, or if you've got underfloor heating, you can take it up to 35 degrees, slightly lower. But the heat pump quite happily does both radiators and underfloor heating. If you're requiring hot water, it can take the temperature right up to 65 degrees. So that means it gets over the G3 regulations for stored water in a hot water cylinder. So that's where it transfers the heat energy on the left-hand side of that diagram into your home. It then, once it's taken the heat energy out of the refrigerant circuit, it turns it back into a liquid, back through a decompression valve, and then it will start the system again and take more heat from the ground. Okay, so that's pretty much a very basic start to how the heat pump works. The majority of our heat pumps, the majority we sell are these shoebox heat pumps. This is a picture of the 3 kilowatt shoebox. This is what we use mostly for flats and small housing in the new build market. We have one which is slightly bigger for a 6 kilowatt heat pump. The 3 kilowatt is the smallest and quietest heat pump on the market, and will quite happily fit in an airing cupboard, which is around about 800 millimeters square by a 2.4 meter ceiling, and you can get a hot water cylinder above that heat pump. Have to remember, when you're using heat pumps at the moment, you do require a hot water cylinder as well as your heat pump. So for the new build market, your 3 kilowatt heat pump for flats and small houses. For slightly bigger houses, you would have a 6 kilowatt heat pump, slightly bigger again. And then for your retrofit housing and larger new build development, you'd be looking at 6 kilowatt or slightly larger Evo series. We also do commercial heat pumps, but that's not really what we're talking about today. So heat pumps, as we spoke about earlier, come in 2 different sorts, really, the air source and ground source heat pumps. As we move into the new building regs after June, all new houses will be required to have a flow temperature of 55 degrees or less. So basically, you're going to need to use a heat pump to be able to get around those regulations or be compliant. So you can look at using either an air source or a ground source heat pump. So why would you use a ground source heat pump? Well, here are some of the benefits. It is more efficient because it uses the temperature from the ground rather than just from the air. If you are using an air source heat pump or a heat pump to heat your house through the winter periods, obviously the air temperature is a lot colder than the ground temperature. The ground temperature is a constant pretty much throughout the year. Because of its more efficiency, it then has lower carbon emissions and lower running costs. And there's also a much greater opportunity to use your heat pump in the middle of the night. So if you imagine you had a development with a lot of apartments or high density developments, if you've got a lot of air source heat pumps all running at once attached to their backyards, there's going to be increased chance of noise. So not really a suitable opportunity to run them in the middle of the night. When you're running a heat pump in the middle of the night, it means you can take advantage of very low carbon and very low cost electricity. This can be seen at the moment. Octopus EV tariffs are offering 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity for a 4-hour period in the middle of the night. So if you're running a heat pump at that period, at a 300% efficient system, it's only a third of your 7.5 pence per kilowatt. So a third of 7.5 pence is just over sort of 2 pence per kilowatt. So if you're using that electricity to heat your hot water in the middle of the night, or if you use it in the morning to heat your house, so when you get up, your house is nice and warm, it means it's the cheapest and most efficient and lowest carbon way of heating your home. This just goes back to what Councillor Martin Alvey was saying at the very beginning of the day, saying we're really looking for something to answer the challenges of housing, which is going to be cheap to run, and efficiency. The other thing I would need to say about the difference between ground source and air source and some of the challenges of affordable housing is the cost of installing the system. Now we talk about CapEx, the amount of money it costs to put it in the very first instance, but really what you should be looking at, as a lot of people have already said today, is life cycle costing. The longevity of a ground source heat pump, because it's an internal piece of kit, as opposed to the air source, which is a metal box which sits outside, is it's going to last a lot longer. Cornwall, as we know, is a very maritime climate with a very long history of long winters of very wet and damp climates. So a metal box sat outside is not going to be the best answer to heating your home. Coastline will tell me that the residences with air source heat pumps may last 8 to 10 years if they're Bly Gold coated. A ground source heat pump is going to last inside 20, 25 years. So you're going to be spending twice as much money on the external bit of kit for an air source heat pump as opposed to the ground source. So Kenza Contracting, we do large amounts of houses all at once. We don't generally fit individual heat pumps in single houses. We fit multiple heat pumps for developments all at once, whether it's new build or retrofit. We do this by installing shared ground loops. These are also called network ground arrays or 5th generation district heat systems. This is where you have a series of boreholes drilled into the area around the houses or in the streets or in the parking areas. So if you imagine a service strip on a traditional building estate where you have a 2-meter strip in the public highway, at the bottom of that you would have a gas pipe. Well, in the future, we're really seeing that you will have the boreholes. And then at the top of that, you will have a connection point to each individual house, whether it's a new build or a retrofit. In a retrofit example, when your gas boiler runs out or your oil boiler doesn't work anymore, you can then take the opportunity to say, okay, what heating system am I going to have now? Or actually, there's a connection outside where I can connect to the ground, the shared ground loop or networked ground loop. So then you can take advantage of all the advantages of a ground source as opposed to having to have direct electric or an air source system. This works for large systems, large developments of many properties, or just a few houses in the end of a cul-de-sac. We can come along and put in 1 or 2 boreholes and connect up a small number of houses as well as a large number of houses. This mimics a traditional gas framework where you would have a third-party company that would own and maintain the pipework in the ground, would levy a service charge, an annual connection fee, much the same as you pay a standing charge for your gas pipework. And then the owner of the house will just connect to the flow and return pipes to the ground array. And at that point, they will own everything inside the house. So the heat pump would be theirs, just the same as you buy and maintain your own gas boiler. This means the cost is then very equivalent to the current gas boilers or air source heat pumps. So the cost of then having your ground source heat pump in your house, you're buying a heat pump from us, from Kenza, at somewhere between £3,500 to £5,000, depending on the size of the heat pump you need. And we are a very small company compared to the people that make gas boilers at the moment. So you can imagine in years to come, when economies of scale really kick in, the heat pumps themselves the cost of those will come down and down, and you will be able to just replace and maintain them as you go along. Maintenance of a heat pump is much the same as the maintenance of your fridge in the garden, in your house. The fridge is a heat pump. If you imagine a fridge was made of rubber and you could turn the whole thing inside out, the grill at the back becomes the radiators in your house, and the food inside the fridge, which gets cold, that's the ground source. That's the ground which takes the heat energy from. You don't have an annual maintenance charge for your heat pump. If you have an unvented cylinder, you might need to have a look at that. Certainly in social housing aspects, there's a regulation, a G3 regulation, to annually inspect an unvented cylinder. However, if you are your own homeowner, you would undertake that yourself. You could have a standard vented cylinder. So the maintenance costs are very, very low. The running costs are the lowest, and the carbon emissions are also the lowest. So that's really what I needed to tell you.
No, thanks for that, George. That's
just
really, informative, yeah.
I just wanted to then come on to why heat the streets, because this is really the elements that we are doing in Stithians. We recently won a bid for and won an ERDF grant, which was £6.2 million, with some private match, gave us nearly £9 million. And this has then enabled us to install 500 heat pump installations across Cornwall. And this is across the full gambit of new build and retrofit properties. And very excitingly, we will be putting in 100 up to 175 properties in Stivians, where we will, the funding will allow us to install for free the installations in private homes in Stivians, where Kenza Utilities, the other part of the group I spoke about earlier, will then own and maintain the ground array in exchange for an annual connection fee from each homeowner, which is going to be signed up to the system. For 20 years, they will pay an annual connection charge, receive a full kit for free, and just like the gas system, they will then benefit from really low cost heating and taking them off oil. And really what we are aiming to show with this project is to show that you can do this in any part of the country. If you can do it in Stivians, you'll be able to do it anywhere in the UK. Sorry if I haven't quite got much longer to go for, but there we are. That's a quick overview of what we're doing at Kenza.
No, that's a fantastic amount of information. I think you've sold a lot of people on the idea and the project in Stivians. I mean, you know, the fact you're able to access grants and deliver that for people at a really affordable cost is just, yeah, inspiring. And I hope people will see that as the way forward. I hope you're getting lots of site visits on that.
Yeah, I must just say big thank you to Lisa Tressida, who I think is on the call still, but may have had to leave, but she was instrumental in getting the funding from the European Regional Development Fund, which is some of the last I think we'll see.
Yeah, well, we can always hope for the Shared Prosperity Fund and what that will deliver. But yeah, no, good use of external funding. No, thank you. So we're probably nearly at the end now. We do have time for. We've all absorbed a fantastic amount of information today. Lots of talks have been really inspiring. I've learned a lot. I'm happy if anybody wants to verbalize any questions, to take questions now. We will be distributing everything, the presentations, the video, a link to the video, an edited version of the chat, contact details, all that will be available to everybody. We were going to sort of put it out there and ask for ideas for an autumn webinar sometime in late October, perhaps. And so if anybody's got any bright ideas they'd like to flag up now, the two things I'm sort of hearing out of all of the comments there are perhaps one around policy. And I know that Cornwall Council are thinking about refreshing their local plan. So maybe that's something we can talk to the council about, getting a forum, if nothing else, to see what the people of Cornwall would like to see in their local plan. And the interesting thing is that self-build has come up quite a bit. And I know there are quite a lot of barriers to self-build, but there seem to be some solutions in all the talks this morning, especially around modular and panel building. So that would be the two I've picked up on. But if nobody else has any suggestions or questions, I'm here. I'm happy to thank you all for your attendance. I hope you found it as interesting as I have, and have a good rest of your day.